Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Harryverse X. In today's episode, we explore, what if Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda found Harry age 5 and the Force fused with magic made him Jedi wizard? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Cupboard Between Stars. The Force did not care about distance. It did not care about the cold vacuum between galaxies, about the laws of physics that said nothing could cross from one universe to another, about the fact that two men, one dead for several years now, one dead for slightly fewer, had no business being anywhere at all, let alone in the quiet, suffocating dark of a suburb in southern England on a Tuesday night in July. The Force cared about none of this. It simply pulled. Obi-Wan Kenobi had been drifting. That was the most honest word for it. Since his death on the Death Star, since the moment Vader's blade had passed through him and he had stepped out of his robes and into something larger and quieter and stranger, he had existed in the living Force the way a song exists after the musician stops playing. Present. Diffuse. Not quite gone. He had watched Luke. He had whispered to him on Hoth, on Dagobah, in the cold moments before Bespin, in the long silence after. He had done what he could. And when Luke had finally pulled his father back from the dark, when Anakin had died in his son's arms and appeared, luminous and young-faced, in the celebration at Endor, Obi-Wan had felt something a knot in his chest that had been knotted since Mustafar. Since long before Mustafar, if he was being honest. After that, he had simply wandered. Not unhappily. The Force was not an unhappy place to be. But there was a specific kind of restlessness that came with having been a man of action for 60 years, and then suddenly having nothing left to act on. He meditated. He observed. He occasionally irritated Kagan, who had been here longer and had achieved a much more convincing serenity about the whole arrangement. Then, one night, though night was a somewhat abstract concept when you existed as a pattern of energy in the living Force, he felt it. Not a disturbance, exactly. A disturbance was the wrong word. A disturbance was what you felt when a planet died, when darkness moved, when something was terribly wrong. This was different. This was more like a note. A single, clear, impossible note, played on an instrument that had no name in any language Obi-Wan knew, resonating at a frequency that was halfway between the Force and something else, something older, something that had been old when the Force itself was young. He stopped drifting. Across the galaxy, across galaxies, which was a sentence he was not entirely prepared for, he felt Yoda stop too. The pull lasted no time at all and an eternity, which was about what Obi-Wan had come to expect from experiences involving Yoda and the Force in combination. When it ended, he was somewhere. Somewhere was a dark street. Quiet, tidy, aggressively normal. Rows of identical houses with identical cars parked in front of them, little squares of lawn kept to identical heights, street lights making identical orange pools on the identical pavement. The kind of place that had decided, collectively and at some point in the recent past, that the most important thing a neighborhood could be was unremarkable. Yoda materialized beside him, or rather the concept of Yoda materialized, the sense of a very small, very ancient, very alert presence standing approximately 3 feet to his left and slightly behind, in the way Yoda always stood when he was reserving judgment. "Where are we?" Obi-Wan asked. "Earth," Yoda said, and then, at Obi-Wan's look, "Know this place, I do not. Know of it, I do. In the Force, many worlds swim. This one, young, it is. Loud. Interesting. You felt it before. Once or twice, through the deep currents. A world where the Force takes a different shape." Yoda's ears tilted forward. Like the Force, and yet not like the Force. Similar notes. A different song. Obi-Wan looked down the street. Nothing moved. The orange street light on the corner hummed its one note. And underneath it, underneath the suburban silence and the distant bark of a dog and the faint sound of a television from one of the houses, he could feel that note again. Closer now. Much closer. Coming from a house about 30 meters away. Number 4. He walked toward it without thinking, because when the Force pointed at something, the only sensible response was to walk toward it and see what it was. Yoda followed, his walking stick making no sound on the pavement, because they were both dead and the physical world was only loosely relevant to them in any case. Number 4, Privet Drive was indistinguishable from its neighbors in every particular. Same lawn. Same car. Same net curtains in the windows, showing nothing. But the note was coming from inside it, and now that he was close, Obi-Wan could feel the shape of it more clearly. It was a child. A small child, in the dark, and what was pouring off them was not suffering in the ordinary sense, though there was suffering in it, layered and old and worn into the corners of it the way water wears stone, but something more specific. Something that Obi-Wan had only felt once or twice in his life, in Padawans who hadn't yet learned how to quiet themselves. Raw power, with nowhere to go. You feel it, he said. Feel it, yes, Yoda said quietly. Force sensitive, this child is. But not only that. He paused. Something else, also. Something I do not have a word for. Something that isn't the Force. The Force it is, and is not. Yoda tapped his walking stick once on the ground, a habit that had apparently survived death intact. Like asking whether light and fire are the same thing. Related. Not identical. Obi-Wan crouched down, which was a fairly metaphorical act given that he had no physical body and the crouching was purely a habit of posture carried over from life, and focused. He reached out through the Force, gently, the way you approached a small animal you didn't want to startle. The power reached back. Not intentionally. Not with any direction or skill. It reached back the way a child reaches out in the dark when they hear a footstep and they're hoping, without much real hope, that it belongs to someone kind. Obi-Wan felt something in him that had been rather carefully packed away for the last several years come immediately unpacked. There is a child, he said, in that house, locked in a very small room, and they are, he stopped. Pressed his lips together. Started again. They are frightened and alone and enormously powerful and they have absolutely no idea that anyone can hear them. Said Yoda. Hear them, we do. They went through the wall, which was one of the conveniences of being dead, and followed the note through the darkness of the house, past a living room where a large man was snoring in an armchair, past a kitchen that smelled of overcooked meat and washing powder, down a short hallway, to a door under the stairs. Not even a real room. A cupboard. Obi-Wan stood in front of it for a moment, looking at the small door with its latch on the outside, and felt something cold and quiet move through him. In there, he said. In there, Yoda agreed, and his tone was unreadable in the way it only was when he was feeling something strongly enough that he decided to feel it privately. They went through the cupboard door. Harry Potter was 5 years old, small for his age, with knobbly knees and black hair that went in every direction regardless of what you did to it, and glasses with a crack in the left lens that had been there for 2 months because nobody had gotten around to fixing it. He was sitting on a thin mattress in the dark with his knees pulled up to his chest and his forehead resting on them, and he was trying very hard not to cry because Dudley had already called him a crybaby twice this week and he was determined not to prove Dudley right about anything. He was also, without being remotely aware of it, making the single candle stub on the small shelf above him flicker in patterns that corresponded exactly to his emotional state, and had been doing so for about 40 minutes. He was not crying. He was simply breathing in a way that was indistinguishable from crying if you were not paying close attention. He felt something. He wasn't sure what. A warmth, maybe, or a feeling like when you wake up and for a second you can't remember where you are, and then you remember, but before you remember, there's that moment where anything could be true. He lifted his head. 2 figures stood in his cupboard. Harry stared at them. He was not scared. He examined this fact with the careful attention of a child who has had to become a very accurate reader of his own emotional state out of pure self-preservation, and confirmed it. He was not scared. He was, surprised, yes, definitely surprised, but the fear wasn't there. The fear that was always there around Uncle Vernon wasn't there around these two, and that was interesting enough that it pushed everything else aside. One of them was tall, or tallish, with a beard and kind eyes and the sort of calm face that made you feel like he'd probably seen much worse than whatever was currently happening and had come through it all right. He was wearing odd clothes, a sort of robe, like something from a picture book about knights, except cleaner and less armored. He was glowing faintly, but in a gentle way, the way the edge of things glow when you look at them sideways. The other one was, Harry tilted his head. The other one was very small. Smaller than Harry, even, which wasn't something he'd expected adults to be. He had very large ears and very large eyes and was very, very green, and was leaning on a walking stick that was just a gnarled bit of wood, and was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry could only describe, even at 5 years old, as interested. "Hello," Harry said. Obi-Wan blinked. He had prepared, in the 3 seconds between going through the door and the boy looking up, for any number of reactions. Screaming. Crying. Retreating into the corner. A complete and understandable breakdown in the face of 2 luminous supernatural entities appearing in a locked cupboard. He had not, in fairness, prepared for hello. "Hello," he said. "My name is Obi-Wan. This is Yoda." Harry looked at Yoda. "Is he a goblin?" "No," Yoda said, and seemed faintly amused by this. "A Jedi Master, I am. Different, goblins are. I don't know what a Jedi Master is." "No," Yoda agreed pleasantly. "And yet." Harry wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, in the way of someone who doesn't particularly want to draw attention to the fact that they'd been crying. "Are you ghosts?" In a manner of speaking, Obi-Wan said. "We exist in the Force, which is, it's a bit complicated, actually. We were people once, and now we're something different. Not quite gone." Harry considered this for a moment. "Like the people in the portraits at the library? Mrs. Figg showed me one once. There was a woman in it, and she waved." Obi-Wan opened his mouth and then closed it again. He looked at Yoda. Yoda's ears had moved upward in a way that meant he was entertained but wasn't going to show it. "Something like that," Obi-Wan said. "Yes." Harry nodded, filing this away, and then looked at the candle above him, which had at some point during the last 30 seconds gone from flickering to burning in a small, steady blue-white flame that had absolutely no business being that color. His brow furrowed. "That keeps doing that," he said. "The candle. It changes. I don't know why." "Because of you," Obi-Wan said. Not as a dramatic revelation. Just as a fact, offered plainly. "It responds to you. To how you're feeling." Harry looked at him. "That's not supposed to happen." "No. In most people it wouldn't. Aunt Petunia says when things happen that aren't supposed to happen it's because I'm being wicked." Obi-Wan felt that cold quiet thing move through him again. He kept his face and voice perfectly even. "Your Aunt Petunia is wrong." Harry blinked. This was not, in his experience, something adults said about other adults in front of children. Adults were usually very committed to the idea that other adults were right, especially when those other adults had opinions about Harry specifically. He stared at Obi-Wan for a moment with the focused intensity that children bring to things they're trying to determine are real. "You're not going to disappear if I blink, are you?" "No," Obi-Wan said. "We're going to stay right here. And if you want, we're going to talk to you for a while. And if you'd rather we left, we'll leave and not bother you. But we came a very long way to find you, Harry, and I think there are things you deserve to know." A pause. Something shifted in the small face across from him. "You know my name," Harry said. "We do. Nobody says my name like that." Obi-Wan had no answer for that, because it required none. He simply held the boy's gaze and waited, and after a moment, Harry Potter pulled his knees a little less tightly to his chest, and the candle burned blue-white and steady, and outside in the narrow street of number 4, Privet Drive, nothing moved at all. They talked for 3 hours. Or rather, Obi-Wan and Yoda talked, and Harry asked questions, and the questions came so quickly and so precisely that by the end of the first hour Obi-Wan had quietly revised his estimate of this child's intelligence upward by several significant degrees. Harry wanted to know what the Force was. Obi-Wan explained it in terms he thought a 5-year-old could hold: it's in everything, it's alive, it connects everything that lives, and some people can feel it more clearly than others. Harry listened with the concentrated stillness of a child who has learned to be very quiet and absorb what adults say when they don't know he's listening, and when Obi-Wan finished he said, "Is that why I can feel when Dudley is going to be mean?" Before he does it. Obi-Wan and Yoda exchanged a glance. "Yes," Obi-Wan said. "Exactly why. And why I could feel you coming. Through the wall." "Yes." Harry picked at the edge of his mattress. "I thought I was just scared a lot. I thought that's what it felt like." "Sometimes," Yoda said gently, "a gift feels like fear, when no one has shown you what it is." Harry looked at him for a long moment, and Yoda met the look without breaking it, without looking away, which was something Harry had not, in 5 years of life, experienced very often. Most adults looked away from him quickly, as if looking too long at Harry Potter was something to be cautious about. He asked about magic. Obi-Wan said that was Yoda's area more than his, which wasn't strictly true. He had felt the shape of it, the way it curled through Harry like a second river running alongside the Force, braided with it, impossible to separate, but he thought Yoda should be the one to speak to it, because Yoda had a talent for making difficult things sound simply complicated rather than terrifyingly strange. Yoda said, "Magic, different from the Force it is. Older, perhaps. From this world, it comes. In your blood it lives, Harry. In the blood of certain people, for many generations. The Force, from the living universe, it flows. Through all things. Magic, from within, it rises. Like a fire that is yours alone." He paused. "Both, you have." "Both?" Harry said. "Both," Yoda confirmed. "Ever seen this before? I have not. Not in 900 years." Harry absorbed this with remarkable equanimity. "Is that bad?" "No," Yoda said. "Remarkable, it is. Aunt Petunia says I'm not remarkable. She says I'm a burden." This time it was Yoda who went quiet in a particular way that wasn't silence but something that had a great deal of weight in it. He looked at Harry and then he said, very simply, "Wrong, she is. In all the ways that matter." Harry's lip wobbled. He didn't cry. He pressed his mouth together and stared at the floor and held very, very still for about 10 seconds, and then he looked up and said, "Will you teach me? The Force things? And the magic?" "We came to find you," Obi-Wan said, "and yes. That's exactly why. Can you teach me to make Dudley stop?" Obi-Wan's mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let's start with something slightly less satisfying and work from there." The first lesson happened right then, at 2 in the morning, in a cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, with a candle burning blue-white and the distant snoring of Vernon Desley providing a somewhat undignified backdrop to what Obi-Wan privately thought was one of the more significant events he'd witnessed in a long career of witnessing significant events. It was simple. He asked Harry to close his eyes and breathe. Just breathe. Feel the breath go in and feel it go out and don't chase any thought, just let it pass the way clouds pass. Harry was a child and children are not known for stillness, but Harry had spent 5 years becoming very good at disappearing inside himself when the outside world was unkind, which meant he had a version of this skill already built from necessity. Within 2 minutes, Harry was in something close to a genuine meditative state. The candle went from blue-white to deep gold. The air in the cupboard changed, subtly but unmistakably, the way air changes when pressure shifts before a storm. Obi-Wan felt it in his bones, or in the memory of his bones, which amounted to the same thing, the Force in the child uncurling from its frightened crouch and rising to meet them, and alongside it, beneath it, twisting with it like 2 rivers running into the sea, the magic doing the same. Yoda made a sound under his breath that Obi-Wan had only heard him make 3 times in the 50 years they'd known each other. It was the sound Yoda made when the universe showed him something that 900 years hadn't prepared him for. "Open your eyes," Obi-Wan said quietly. Harry opened his eyes. Every object in the cupboard was floating. The candle. The mattress. 3 pebbles Harry had apparently been keeping on the shelf for reasons of his own. A small, battered toy soldier that was missing its right arm. All of it, suspended in the air in perfect stillness, glowing faintly at the edges the way things glow when the Force holds them. Harry looked around at all of it. His face went through surprise and then wonder and then, unmistakably, something that looked very much like the expression of someone coming home to a house they didn't know they'd been missing. "Oh," he said quietly. "Oh, it's mine." "Yours," Obi-Wan confirmed. "I can feel it." Harry raised a hand and turned it over, looking at it, and the toy soldier drifted slowly to him and settled in his palm. "I can feel it like I'm touching everything at once. Like the room is a part of me." "Yes," Obi-Wan said. "That's it exactly." Harry closed his fist gently around the toy soldier and looked up at him with an expression of fierce, private gladness that made Obi-Wan think of a light being switched on in a room that had been dark for a very long time. "Don't tell me to put it down," Harry said. "Not a demand." "Not exactly. More like a statement of terms." "Wouldn't dream of it," Obi-Wan said. They came back the next night. And the one after that. Within 2 weeks it had become simply a fact of Harry's existence. The way the crack in his glasses was a fact and the way the spider in the corner of the cupboard was a fact. Obi-Wan and Yoda came at night, when the house was quiet, and they talked, and they taught him things, and Harry learned. He was a ferocious learner. Not the kind that performed for praise, he had never received enough of it to develop that habit, but the kind that learned because the thing being learned was interesting, because the world was full of questions and every answer opened 3 more. He wanted to know the history of the Jedi, and Obi-Wan told him, the good parts and the hard parts both, not flinching from Anakin's story, not flinching from his own failures, because Harry had a fine-tuned instinct for when he was being given a carefully edited version of something. He wanted to know about magic, about the people who had it, about the world that had grown up around it, about the school that would eventually send him a letter. Yoda knew some of this from the deep currents of the Force and what he'd read there, and what he didn't know, he admitted he didn't know, which Harry seemed to find deeply refreshing coming from someone who was 900 years old. He practiced the Force every night. Levitation first, he had the instinct for it immediately, the sense of extension, of reaching out, and then the subtler things. The stillness. The listening. Obi-Wan taught him to center himself, to find the quiet place in the middle of things where fear didn't reach. Harry found it faster than anyone Obi-Wan had trained, which should not have surprised him given the boy's already existing relationship with controlled stillness, but surprised him anyway. He also, on the 4th night, somewhat spontaneously produced a Patronus-adjacent ball of silvery light from his left hand while Obi-Wan was trying to teach him the basics of Force push, and regarded it with great curiosity while Obi-Wan tried to find words for what he'd just witnessed. "What is that?" Harry asked, turning it over. "That," Obi-Wan said, "is magic. It came when I was thinking about the talking." Harry tilted his head. "About you and Yoda coming. It feels warm." "Magic responds to emotion," Obi-Wan said carefully, because they were entering territory neither he nor Yoda had a complete map for. "Strong magic, especially. The kind in your blood. It listens to what you feel. So the Force is calm and magic is feeling." Obi-Wan opened his mouth. Yoda said, simply, "Together, in you they are. Argue later about definitions, we will." Harry grinned, and the silvery light pulsed brighter for a moment, and then faded. The grin was new. In the first 2 weeks, Harry's expressions had been careful and small, the expressions of someone who'd learned that showing too much on your face was information other people could use against you. The grin was different. It reached his eyes, which were extraordinarily green, vivid green, the kind of color that seemed slightly more saturated than the colors around it, and when it appeared, Obi-Wan found himself smiling back before he'd decided to. The first time the Dursleys noticed something was wrong, or right, depending on your perspective, was a Saturday in August. Dudley Dursley was a large child, well-fed and well-indulged, who had spent most of his 5 years on Earth discovering that he could make things happen by hitting them. This approach had served him well in most areas of his life and he had no particular reason to deviate from it. He cornered Harry in the back garden while Petunia was inside on the phone and Vernon was washing the car, and he hit Harry in the shoulder hard enough to make Harry stagger. This was not new. What was new was what happened next. Harry didn't flinch. He staggered, caught his balance, and turned around. And he looked at Dudley with an expression that was, not angry, exactly. Not frightened. Calm. Attentive. The expression of someone who has recently been learning, among other things, to read the intentions of a person before they act on them. Don't, Harry said. Don't what? Dudley said, and shoved him. This time, Harry didn't move at all. Not because he braced himself. Not because he tensed. He simply wasn't moved. It was a subtle thing, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. A faint shimmer around him, like heat haze, that lasted exactly as long as the shove did. Dudley's hands bounced off him as though he were a wall, and Dudley stumbled back, confused, looking at his own hands. Harry looked at him with those calm green eyes. Stop, he said. Dudley, who had never in his life been told this by Harry and had it mean anything, did not stop. He swung a fist, because when shoving fails, the natural escalation is fists. Harry caught it. He caught it in one small hand, almost absently, the way you'd catch a ball that's rolling off a table, and held it, and looked at his cousin without anger or cruelty but with a very complete attention, and said, quite quietly, I said stop, Dudley. Dudley pulled his hand back. He stepped away. He looked at Harry in a way he had never looked at him before and then he turned and walked quickly into the house without another word, and Harry stood in the garden alone, looking down at his hand. He flexed it once. He smiled. Inside, in the cool logic of the living force where Obi-Wan hovered at the edges of the afternoon, watching through the connection they'd been slowly building between them, the smile registered as a minor bright point in the fabric of things. A child discovering that the world could be answered on different terms than the ones he'd been given. Good, Obi-Wan thought, and felt it resonate back through the connection. Vernon noticed the changes more slowly, because Vernon noticed things that threatened his comfort very quickly and things that confused him very slowly, and Harry had become confusing in a way that sat outside his comfort in a direction he couldn't name. The boy was different. He moved differently, stood differently. He used to hunch, to make himself smaller, and now he stood straight without being conscious of standing straight. He was quiet in a way that wasn't the quietness of a frightened child but the quietness of someone who was very busy on the inside. He also, on 3 separate occasions that Vernon could identify and probably more that he couldn't, made things happen. The first time, Petunia's prize roses, which she'd been fussing over all summer because the aphids were particularly bad this year, bloomed overnight into something extraordinary, taller and fuller and more vividly red than any variety in the catalogue, and when Petunia went outside to find them she found Harry standing near them with his hands in his pockets and a carefully neutral expression. The second time, a cupboard door that had been stuck for 6 months and which Vernon had been meaning to fix and hadn't came unstuck at precisely the moment Harry walked past it. The third time was harder to explain, even to himself. He had raised his hand to Harry, the way he sometimes did, and didn't always follow through on, because sometimes the raising of the hand was enough, and Harry had looked at him. Just looked at him. And Vernon's hand had stopped, not because he'd decided to stop it, but because something in the air had changed, something that made the back of his neck prickle and his mouth go dry, and he'd found himself putting his hand down without having made the decision to do so, and Harry had looked at him for one more moment with those green eyes that were suddenly a great deal more present than they used to be, and then walked away. Vernon did not mention this to Petunia. Petunia, who had grown up knowing very exactly what it looked like when magic began to wake in someone, and had been half waiting and half dreading it since the boy came to live with them, held her own counsel. She watched Harry from behind her net curtains and her careful face and thought about her sister and did not say anything to anyone at all. On the last night of August, with summer turning at the edges and the air smelling of cool things coming, Harry sat cross-legged on his mattress and asked a question he'd been building toward for weeks. "What happened to your Padawan?" he said. "Anakin." Obi-Wan had known the question was coming. He'd felt Harry turning it over in the Force, picking it up and putting it down, approaching it from different angles in the way he did with questions he thought might hurt someone to answer. He was quiet for a long moment. "He fell," Obi-Wan said. "To the dark side. To fear, and grief, and a man who offered him the wrong answer to the right question." "What was the question?" "How do you keep someone you love from dying?" Harry was quiet. "There's no answer to that," Harry said. "There isn't. But there are ways of living with it." Anakin didn't want to live with it. He wanted to solve it. And the only solution on offer was one that cost him everything he was trying to protect. Did he die? Eventually. He came back, first. At the end. Because someone loved him enough to try, Harry said, not asking. Obi-Wan looked at him. 5 years old, and he'd gone straight to the center of it. "Yes," he said. "Because his son loved him enough to try." Harry pulled his knees up and put his chin on them. Outside, a last cricket was singing somewhere in the garden. The candle burned its steady gold. "I love my mum and dad," Harry said. "Even though I don't remember them." "Is that weird?" "No," Obi-Wan said. "It isn't weird at all. I think they were good people. I don't know why I think that. I just do." "They were," Obi-Wan said, because the Force had shown him this much, had shown him the shape of what remained of James and Lily Potter in their son, the courage and the warmth and the stubbornness and the particular fierceness that only comes from people who love beyond their own safety. Harry nodded once, like someone confirming something they already knew. The cricket sang outside. Yoda sat in the corner and said nothing, which was his way of saying everything was as it should be. "Obi-Wan," Harry said. "Yes. I'm glad you came." Obi-Wan had been a Jedi for 60 years. He had kept his composure in situations of significantly greater external drama than a child in a cupboard saying something simple and true. He kept it now, with no difficulty whatsoever, and if his voice was very slightly different when he answered, it was the kind of difference that only someone paying close attention would notice. "I am too," he said. "More than I can tell you." Yoda's walking stick tapped once on the floor, quietly, as the cricket went on singing. What no one at number 4 Privet Drive knew, and what no one in the ordinary world had any frame of reference for, was that in the weeks since 2 dead Jedi had followed a note in the Force through the walls of that ordinary house, something fundamental had changed in the nature of what Harry Potter was. Not in the things he could do, though those were extraordinary. In the way those things fit together. Magic, in a wizard, was inherited and instinctual and personal, it lived in the blood and listened to the heart and was shaped by the wand and the will. The Force, in a Jedi, was universal and disciplined and connecting, it was in all things and through all things and it asked its students to be still enough to hear it. In any other person, having both would have been a contradiction. 2 rivers flowing in opposite directions through the same channel, tearing the banks apart. In Harry, they braided. They did it naturally, without friction, the way 2 notes that are the correct interval apart don't fight but harmonize. The magic made the Force more intuitive, more personal, gave it an emotional richness that pure Jedi training could take lifetimes to develop. The Force gave the magic a depth and steadiness and reach that magic alone didn't have, a way of extending beyond the self and into the world. Together, they were something new. Neither Obi-Wan nor Yoda had a name for it. Neither did Harry. He simply felt it as himself, as the warm, steady, reaching thing inside him that was the most natural fact of his existence, as natural as breathing, as natural as the green of his eyes or the direction his hair grew. He was 5 years old. He had 2 teachers who were dead but fully present. He was locked in a cupboard under the stairs in suburban England, and he was, for the first time in his life, something he would not have had a word for yet but would, eventually, be able to name. He was free. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Moved Like Water. 3 years is a long time when you're 8. At 5, Harry had been a small frightened child with cracked glasses and no vocabulary for what lived inside him. At 8, he was something considerably more difficult to categorize. He was still small. The Dursleys' approach to feeding him had not changed substantially, though it had become slightly less aggressive since the incident in the garden with Dudley, and again since the incident on the stairs where Vernon had raised his hand, and he still had the glasses, though they were a different pair now, an event with its own story attached to it. But he moved differently. He'd been moving differently for about 2 years, gradually enough that the Dursleys had experienced it the way you experience the tide going out. You look up one day and the water is simply further away than it was, and you can't identify the moment it happened. He moved through the house the way water moves through stone, quietly, without friction, with a patience that had nothing frightened in it. He did his assigned chores efficiently and without complaint, not because he was beaten down but because he found he didn't mind the work when he was using it to practice the Force, to feel the edges of each task and do it precisely and completely and then let it go. He cleaned, and it was a meditation. He cooked, and it was another. The Dursleys got the best meals of their lives from a child they'd been trying to ignore for years, and they attributed it to themselves in the way people do when the truth is too complicated. He was, by any measurement that mattered, deeply happy. Not the performed happiness of a child trying to keep adults pleased. Not the sealed-off, privately maintained happiness of someone making the best of bad circumstances. He was happy the way people are happy when they have work they love and teachers they trust and something growing inside them that fills up the quiet hours. Every night, Obi-Wan and Yoda came. Not always for long. Some nights it was 2 hours of structured training, for my lightsaber footwork with an improvised wooden stick, Force exercises, meditation sequences, Yoda's increasingly elaborate lessons in magical theory that drew on what the Force had shown him about the wizarding world's history and structure. Some nights it was conversation. Obi-Wan telling him about the Clone Wars with the honest unsentimental clarity of a man who'd survived them and had had time to understand them. Yoda telling him stories from centuries past in the oblique, layered way Yoda told everything, so that you thought you were hearing about a battle and then realized halfway through that you were actually hearing about grief, or courage, or the precise nature of patience. Some nights they simply sat together in the dark and the Force hummed between them and nobody said anything at all. Harry had learned, in 3 years, an astonishing amount. His Force abilities had developed with a speed that Obi-Wan privately found almost alarming, though he showed none of this, because alarming Harry into caution was not something he intended to do. His telekinesis was smooth and precise. He could hold a dozen objects in the air simultaneously and move them independently of each other, which most Jedi Padawans didn't manage until their mid-teens. His Force sense was extraordinary, the emotional richness that the magic gave it making it more like reading a room than scanning it. He didn't just feel the presence of living things, he felt their states, their intentions, the texture of their attention. He had started what Obi-Wan called passive Force influence, though that was perhaps too formal a name for what it actually was, the ability to be so genuinely calm and so genuinely centered that the people around him tended to become slightly calmer and more centered themselves, without knowing why. Obi-Wan had a theory that the braided nature of Harry's abilities, Force and magic feeding each other, meant that his emotional influence on his environment was stronger than a pure Force user's would be. The magic was ambient in a way the Force wasn't, it reached out whether he directed it to or not, like warmth from a fire. Yoda had a different theory, which was that Harry was simply that kind of person, and some people were, and the Force had very good taste. The magic itself was a separate conversation. It didn't behave like what either of them understood wizarding magic to be, it was more instinctive, more deeply personal, less dependent on verbal incantation or wand direction. Harry sometimes produced effects with no gesture at all, simply with intent, which Yoda suspected was because the Force was lending the magic a precision of will that most young witches and wizards had to develop slowly through years of education. When Harry wanted something specific to happen, the full weight of his Force-trained intention went into the wanting, and the magic heard it cleanly. He had also recently, and without any particular encouragement, started producing light. Not the accidental silvery glow of that first night. Something deliberate, varied, controllable. He could make a soft warm sphere of it to read by, or a sharp focused beam, or let it spread through a space like dawn, everything gradient and slow. It was beautiful, and it was wholly his, and when Obi-Wan asked where it had come from, Harry said, very matter-of-factly, that he'd been thinking about what Yoda said about the Force being in everything, and about what magic felt like when it was happy, and he'd wondered what would happen if he tried to put them together on purpose. Obi-Wan had looked at Yoda. Yoda had looked at Obi-Wan. Wondering, Yoda said, "Dangerous, it is." "Absolutely," Obi-Wan agreed. Harry grinned and made the light brighter. St. Grogu's primary school was not, by any objective measure, a good school. It was fine in the way most institutions are fine when nobody is paying particular attention. The teachers were mostly tired and the curriculum was mostly adequate and the social dynamics were mostly Lord of the Flies with better snacks. Harry attended it 5 days a week and found it, on balance, more interesting than the Dursleys' house primarily because there were books. He read everything. Fiction, non-fiction, history, science. The school library was small and he'd worked through most of it twice. His teachers found him slightly difficult to characterize in their end-of-year reports because he tested extremely well and participated thoughtfully in discussions and seemed to be paying perfect attention at all times, but there was always the sense that most of what was happening at the front of the class was, for Harry Potter, the less interesting of the two conversations currently occurring. The other conversation being the one he was having with the Force. He'd learned, in 3 years, to read people the way a skilled musician reads a room. Not intrusively, he was careful about that, because Obi-Wan was very clear about the ethics of it, about the difference between being aware and imposing, between listening and reaching in uninvited. But he could feel the shape of a room's attention, the undercurrents of mood, the moments before something shifted. He knew when his teacher, Mrs. Melbourne, was approaching a bad day because there was a flatness in her usual warmth before she arrived that smoothed out once she got into the classroom and had something to focus on. He knew when the dinner lady, Mrs. Harris, was having trouble at home because she radiated a distracted sadness that never quite touched her determined cheerfulness, and he sometimes manufactured small reasons to need something near her so he could stand close enough for his ambient warmth to register. He wasn't sure if she felt it or if it made any difference. But it seemed like the thing to do. The one variable in Harry's carefully maintained equilibrium at St. Grogu's was, as it had been since reception year, Dudley Dursley and his small dedicated mob. Dudley had transferred his approach to Harry from physical to social with the strategic flexibility of someone who had figured out that the first approach wasn't working. He couldn't make Harry flinch. He couldn't make him run. Physical confrontation had become quietly humiliating in ways Dudley couldn't fully explain, so he'd moved to the subtler campaign of ensuring nobody talked to Harry, sat next to Harry, or acknowledged Harry's existence in any positive way. Harry found this more manageable than Dudley probably hoped, because Harry's primary social relationships were with 2 dead Jedi and the Force itself, and loneliness was not a condition he carried anymore. He also found it considerably more transparent than Dudley probably realized. He could feel the mechanics of it, the small pressures Dudley applied, the recalibrations in his classmates' behavior, the way people checked Dudley's reaction before responding to Harry. He watched it with a detached, slightly sad understanding that had none of the sting it would have had 3 years ago. He did not intervene. Obi-Wan had been clear, and patient, and repetitive on this point. Power is not for settling social disputes that don't require settling. Let people be people. Understand them. Don't manage them. He let it be. Right up until the Wednesday in October when it stopped being about him. Her name was Emily Chen, and she was 7 years old and small and wore her hair in 2 plaits, and she had recently arrived in year 3 from a school in Bristol and had made the mistake of sitting next to Harry on her second day because nobody else offered. Dudley had, naturally, interpreted this as an act of war against his established order, and the campaign that had previously been directed solely at Harry had in the past week expanded to include Emily, who had not had 3 years of Jedi training to prepare her and found it accordingly bewildering and terrible. Harry had watched this happening with a growing tightness in his chest that he recognized as anger, the kind that came when something unjust was being done to someone who didn't have the tools to answer it. He could feel Emily's unhappiness like a bruise in the air near her. She was trying very hard not to show it, eating her lunch at the edge of the canteen with her book propped up and her face carefully composed, but the Force told him what the face didn't. He sat down next to her. "Hello," he said. She looked up, then around, checking for watchers. "They'll come after you," she said. "They already do," Harry said pleasantly. "Has it been a bad week?" She looked at him for a moment with the particular measuring look of a child who has recently had reasons to be suspicious of kindness. Then, "Piers told everyone I smell funny. Piers tells everyone everything funny. Last month he told everyone I was scared of the school cat. The cat and I are fine." Harry took a bite of his sandwich. "Does it feel better or worse when you try to ignore it?" Emily considered. "Worse. Like I'm pretending." "It is pretending. It doesn't work very well." He paused. "What does work is deciding you don't actually need their opinion to be any particular thing. It's harder to practice than it sounds." She looked at him with an expression of someone receiving advice that is somewhat more sophisticated than they expected from a classmate. "How do you do it?" "I think of things that are true," Harry said. "Things I know for certain. Not things people say, but things I know. And I hold those and let everything else go past." "What kind of things?" Harry thought about this. "I know I'm good at reading. I know I can make things grow." He had, in fact, demonstrated this in the school garden beds when nobody was looking, with results that had the science teacher quietly baffled. "I know that people who need to make other people feel small are usually doing it because they feel small themselves." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Dudley doesn't seem to feel small." "No," Harry agreed. "He does, though. Somewhere he doesn't show." She considered this with the serious attention of a 7-year-old processing a genuinely new idea. Then, apparently deciding to trust him, "I like your glasses." Harry's glasses were currently held together at the bridge with a small piece of copper wire, because he'd been trying to practice a precision force technique the week before and had misjudged the distance to a shelf. "They've had better days," he said. Emily laughed, and the bruised quality in the air near her lightened perceptibly, and across the canteen Dudley Desley watched the two of them with the dawning understanding that his campaign had just become more complicated. It came to a head at the end of the school day, in the way things do at the end of school days when boys with something to prove have had several hours to let it build. The back of the school, past the sports shed, was the geography of consequence at St. Gregory's. It was where things got settled, informally, in the way the formal structures of primary school never quite managed. Dudley had communicated, through Piers, that Harry and his new friend should present themselves there at 3:30. Harry had received this message, considered it, and was now standing with his back to the sports shed wall, entirely unbothered, watching Dudley and the 3 members of his rotating entourage approach across the patchy grass. Emily was beside him and was doing admirably, he thought, for someone who'd had no preparation for this. "You don't have to stay," he told her, quietly. "I want to," she said. Not easily, he could feel the effort in it, but genuinely. "Okay," he said. Dudley stopped in front of them and did the thing he always did, which was to arrange himself so that he was very large and present, and the implicit promise of his size was the first thing you were supposed to process. He'd gotten bigger over the summer. He looked at Harry and then at Emily. "New friend," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "She'll get tired of you." "They all do." "You may be right," Harry said, in a tone that conveyed complete acceptance of this as a theoretical possibility while implying through its very equanimity that it did not in any way concern him. "Was there something specific you wanted, Dudley, or is this mostly about the principle of the thing?" Dudley blinked. He was not accustomed to being asked to articulate his motivations. "You think you're something," Dudley said. "Not in particular," Harry said. Ever since, Dudley stopped. He was approaching the edge of something he didn't have words for, the thing that had been building since the garden, since the stairs, since the various occasions when Harry had simply looked at him and the world had rearranged itself in some way Dudley couldn't explain. You think you're better than us? I don't, Harry said, with perfect honesty. I think I'm different from you. That's not the same thing. You've been doing things, Dudley said. Weird things. I've seen you. The entourage murmured supportively. Harry looked at his cousin. Felt the shape of what was actually happening, underneath the performance. Dudley was frightened, genuinely this time, not the instinctive bully's fear of losing hierarchy, but something deeper, something that had been accumulating for 3 years of watching Harry become something he didn't understand. Dudley Dursley was frightened of Harry Potter, and that fear was performing itself as aggression because that was the only performance Dudley had. Harry felt, briefly, quite sorry for him. Dudley, he said, gently enough that Dudley's brow furrowed in confusion at the tone. Nothing I can do is going to hurt you. I'm not trying to take anything away from you. He paused. If you want to go home, go home. If you want to stand here, stand here. But I'm not going anywhere and neither is Emily, and whatever you're planning to do isn't going to go the way you think. You can't know that, Piers said, from behind Dudley's left shoulder. Harry looked at him mildly. I do, actually. There was a pause in which the afternoon held its breath. Dudley shoved Harry hard, both hands, the full commitment of a large child's frustration. Harry moved. Not back, sideways, a step and pivot that had the quality of something practiced until it was instinct, and Dudley's momentum carried him stumbling forward into the empty space where Harry had been. Harry was beside him now, not touching him, watching him recover his balance, and his voice when he spoke was still calm. You're going to hurt yourself, Harry said. Piers came around the side fast, looking for a clean shot, and the air pressure changed, just slightly, just enough, a wall of warm nothing, and Piers stopped as if he'd walked into glass, looked at his own hands, and backed up one step. Dudley turned around. He looked at Harry with something that was past anger now, into a place Harry recognized, the place where the story you've been telling yourself stops making sense and you don't have another one yet. What are you? Dudley said. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The honest answer was something he couldn't give on a Tuesday afternoon behind the sports shed at St. Gregory's. So he gave the next truest thing, I'm your cousin, he said. That's not going to change. I'm not your enemy either, even if you'd find it easier if I was. He held Dudley's gaze for 3 more seconds, long enough for the force to carry whatever it was going to carry, and then he looked at Emily. Walk home, he said. Yes, Emily said immediately. They walked away, and behind them there was no footstep following, and when Harry checked the shape of the air behind him, what he found in Dudley Dursley was not rage or humiliation but something quieter and more confused, the particular quality of someone standing at the edge of a question they haven't asked yet. Not fixed. Nothing was fixed by a conversation behind a sports shed. But possibly, slightly, moved. The news of the incident behind St. Gregory's sports shed spread, as news does in primary school, with tremendous speed and a fidelity to the original facts that could most charitably be described as loose. By the following morning it had become, depending on who you asked, either that Harry Potter had somehow thrown Dudley 10 feet through the air without touching him, or that Harry Potter had some kind of weird alien hypnosis, or that Harry Potter had simply said something very frightening, accounts of which varied. What it actually did was reach the ears of a 7-year-old in year 2 called Neville Longbottom, who had his own quiet reasons for being interested in strange things that happened around children, and who told his gran that evening at dinner that something peculiar was going on at a school in Little Whinging. What it also did, through an entirely separate chain of information that moved faster and less visibly than primary school gossip, was reach the desk of the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Albus Dumbledore sat behind his desk, half-moon spectacles balanced on his nose, and read the monitoring report from the Trace, the magic-detecting enchantment placed on all children of wizarding blood, which had been producing intermittent and frankly peculiar readings from the Surrey area for approximately 3 years. The readings were unusual not because they were high, they were extraordinarily high, the highest he'd seen from a child below Hogwarts age, which alone was remarkable, but because of their character. They didn't read like accidental magic. They read like controlled magic. Deliberate. Precise. And interwoven with something else, some other energy signature, that the trace simply didn't have a category for. He sat for a while looking at the report. Outside his window, a phoenix was singing something slow and complicated. He'd been watching the readings for 2 years, telling himself it was the peculiarity of the boy who lives magical inheritance, telling himself it could wait, that the child was safe enough at Privet Drive, that there were plans in motion and plans within plans and Harry Potter's name was at the center of them and would remain there. He'd been telling himself all of this with the practiced ease of a man who had learned to be comfortable with knowing things others didn't. But these readings. He put the report down. He picked it up again. He took off his spectacles and cleaned them, which was a thing he did when he was trying to buy time for his instincts to reach the same conclusion his reason had already arrived at. Something was happening at Privet Drive that he had not anticipated. He set a reminder, mental, the way Dumbledore kept all his most important reminders, to visit Little Whinging. Not yet. Not immediately. But before the letter went out. Before Hogwarts. He needed to see the boy first. He needed to see what Harry Potter had become. 2 weeks after the sports shed incident, Emily Chen knocked on the front door of number 4 Privet Drive for the first time, holding a library book Harry had lent her and wearing the expression of someone who has decided to do the brave thing. Petunia answered the door, looked at Emily with barely concealed surprise, and called for Harry in a voice that was slightly more normal than her usual register for addressing him, a calibration she seemed to make automatically when there were witnesses. Harry appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and Emily held out the book. "I finished it," she said. "You were right about the ending." "I'm usually right about endings," Harry said, taking it. "Do you want to come in?" "I was making tea." Emily came in, and Petunia retreated to the living room with the expression of someone who has just processed something unfamiliar and decided to deal with it later, and Harry made tea in the small kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it since he was old enough to reach the kettle, and Emily sat at the kitchen table and looked around the house with the frank curiosity of an 8-year-old. "It's very clean," she said. "I clean it," Harry said. She absorbed this without comment, which Harry appreciated. He poured the tea. Outside, the afternoon was golden with autumn, leaves beginning their slow renegotiation with the trees. "Dudley hasn't done anything this week," Emily said. "No. He looked at me yesterday like he was going to say something and then didn't." "Give him time," Harry said. "He's working something out. You're very relaxed about him." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "Most people aren't relaxed about people who've been horrible to them for years." "I'm relaxed about lots of things," Harry said. "It's something I've been practicing." Emily looked at him over her mug with the expression she'd been wearing more frequently lately, the one that meant she was updating her model of what he was. "You're strange," she said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know," Harry said. "Thank you." She laughed. The kitchen was warm. Obi-Wan was somewhere nearby. Harry could feel him, the quiet ambient presence that had been as constant as air for 3 years now, hovering at a respectful distance. Not interfering. Just present. The way good people are present when they trust you to handle things. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said. "Yes." She paused, turning her mug in her hands. "Do you ever feel like things are about to happen? Before they happen? Like a sort of pressure?" Harry went very still. "Not fearfully. Carefully, the way you hold a thread that might be fragile." "Yes," he said. "It started about a week ago," she said. "I keep feeling like something's coming. And like the air has more in it than it usually does, somehow." She looked at him, slightly sheepish. You probably think that's stupid. I don't, Harry said. Has it ever happened to you? He thought about how to answer this. He thought about Obi-Wan and Yoda and 3 years of learning in the dark, and about the light he could make, and about the way the Force felt when it was fully open and reaching, and about all the things that were true and couldn't be said in a kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon to a girl who was just beginning to feel the edge of something that Harry had been swimming in for 3 years. Yes, he said. All the time. Emily looked at him. Her Force presence, he'd felt it since the first day, actually, the faint warmth of it, smaller and newer than his but genuinely there, pulsed slightly, as if responding to his acknowledgement. She didn't know what she had yet. She was at the very beginning of something, standing at the door of a room she hadn't found the name for. Harry thought about what Obi-Wan had said to him 3 years ago. About a gift that feels like fear when no one has shown you what it is. The feeling, he said, isn't bad, is it? It might feel strange but it doesn't feel wrong. She thought about it. No, she said slowly. It feels true. Like when you read a sentence and it describes something you always knew but never had words for. Then trust it, Harry said. Pay attention to it. Don't talk yourself out of it. She looked at him for a long moment. Do you know what it is? I have some ideas, Harry said honestly. But I think you should sit with it a bit first. Some things need time to show you what they are before anyone else tells you. It was the most Yoda-adjacent sentence he'd ever said, and he heard it as it left his mouth and filed it away to tell Yoda later, because Yoda would be insufferably pleased. That night, when the house was quiet and the street outside was dark and Harry sat cross-legged on his mattress with the candle burning gold, Obi-Wan appeared wearing the expression he wore when he was about to say something that had been waiting. Emily, he said. I know, Harry said. You felt it too. She's Force-sensitive, Harry said. She's just starting. It's like standing near something that's just catching. What are you going to do? Harry thought about it. What you did with me, he said. Except gently. At her pace. I'm not going to tell her, not yet. I'm going to be nearby and let it develop and see what she needs. And if it develops quickly, then I'll tell her. When she's ready to hear it. Obi-Wan looked at him for a moment. Harry was 8 years old, sitting in a cupboard under the stairs, making considered judgments about how to nurture another person's connection to the Force. He looked, not like a child playing at wisdom, which would have been easy to dismiss, but like someone who had internalized something genuine and was applying it with their own character rather than parroting it. Something about it made Obi-Wan's chest ache, in the particular way it ached when something good was happening. You could be a teacher one day, he said. Harry made a face. I'm 8. Anakin was 9 when I started training him. How did that go? Harry said, perfectly pleasantly. There was a pause. That's extremely unfair, Obi-Wan said. Sorry, Harry said, grinning, not sorry at all. Yoda made a sound from the corner that was definitively a laugh, in spite of everything. The last days of October brought something else. Harry was in the library at school, the comfortable late afternoon library, warm and underlit, smelling of old paperback and radiators, when he felt it. Not the Force, exactly. Not the magic. Something that moved through both of them the way a hand moves through water, disturbing them both, leaving a wake. He looked up from his book. Nothing. The library was empty except for him and Mrs. Denny, the librarian, who was cataloging returns with the focused contentment of a person whose job is perfectly suited to them. He set the book down. He reached out, carefully, in the way Obi-Wan had taught him, not broadcasting but listening, feeling the shape of the space around him. Normal. The dusty warmth of books, the ambient peace of a room people came to be quiet in, Mrs. Denny's comfortable presence in the corner. And on the edge. Something watching. He turned his head slowly toward the window. A cat sat on the exterior windowsill. This was not in itself extraordinary. Cats sat on windowsills. It was almost definitionally what windowsills were for. But this cat was sitting with an attentiveness that went well past the usual feline interest in interior spaces, and its eyes, when it met Harry's gaze through the glass, were square-pupilled. Not slit-pupilled, the way cats' eyes went in the light. Square. Harry looked at it for a long moment. The cat looked back. He smiled, slowly, and the cat blinked its square-pupilled eyes, and somewhere on the very edge of his awareness he felt something large and complex and old shift its attention, the way a mountain might shift if mountains paid attention to things. Someone was looking at him through that cat. Someone who was trying to be subtle about it. Harry returned his eyes to his book, and with his left hand, very casually, without disrupting the expression on his face at all, moved the faintest breath of force outward, through the window glass, and let it touch the cat's awareness, not intrusively, just enough to let whoever was on the other end feel it clearly. "I know you're there." He turned a page. Outside, the cat sat motionless for 3 seconds, and then, with an extremely undignified scramble, fell off the windowsill. Harry allowed himself a small, private smile, and went back to reading. That night he told Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was quiet for a moment. "Describe the eyes again." "Square pupils. Like a goat." "But a cat." "Animagus," Obi-Wan said, and then, at Harry's look, "a witch or wizard who can transform into an animal." "Completely. Including the eyes, which tend to retain something of their original nature." He paused. "Someone in the wizarding world is watching you." "They've been watching me for a while," Harry said. "The readings from whatever they use to track magic, I could feel them checking it. Like someone taking your temperature, but for the air around you." Obi-Wan raised his eyebrows slightly. "You could feel that?" "For about a year. It was very faint, like someone listening at a door. I didn't mention it because it didn't feel hostile." Harry pulled at the edge of his mattress. "Who would it be?" Yoda spoke from the corner. "Dumbledore," he said. "Powerful wizard, he is. Old. Watching, he would be." "You know about him?" Harry said. "In the Force, much can be felt. A mind like his, it leaves a mark, even from a distance. Careful, he is. Clever. Not unkind." Yoda paused. "But a plan, he has. For you. Has always had." Harry felt something shift in the room. "What kind of plan?" Yoda and Obi-Wan exchanged the look they exchanged when they were deciding how much to tell him. Harry had gotten very good at reading this look. It was the look of people who genuinely respected him and were also genuinely uncertain where the line was between preparing him and burdening him. "I'll find out eventually," Harry said. "I'd rather know now." Another pause, and then Obi-Wan said, carefully, "There's a dark wizard. One who was believed destroyed the night your parents died." "Voldemort," Harry said. He'd felt the shape of it in the Force for a long time, the absence where something catastrophic had been, the event horizon of the thing that had killed his parents, the gravitational weight of it on the magical world. He'd never known the name. He did now, and it landed heavy but clean, the way true things always did. "He's not gone." "No," Obi-Wan said. "Not entirely. And there is, Dumbledore believes there is a prophecy. That you are the one who can face him. End him." Harry looked at his hands. Turned them over. These hands that moved objects without touching them, that made light, that had held back a 5-year-old's shove and a bully's fist with equal quietness. "Okay," he said. Obi-Wan blinked. "Okay. Someone has to," Harry said. "He killed my parents. He hurt the whole world to get to me and he didn't even manage it." He looked up, and his eyes were steady and very clear. "I'm not afraid of a man who failed to kill a 1-year-old. He said it simply, as a fact, and it was a fact, and neither Obi-Wan nor Yoda said anything to contradict it. Because there was nothing to contradict. The boy who had been locked in a cupboard 3 years ago had grown into something that even a dead Jedi Master had to stop and consider. The candle burned gold and steady. Outside, autumn moved through Privet Drive with its slow bright colors, and the square-pupiled cat did not return to the library windowsill that week, but Harry was quite certain it would be back. He didn't mind. He had a great deal more to show them. Chapter 3, Letters, Lightsabers, and Lies. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry knew it was coming before it came. He'd known for about a week, the way you know weather is turning when the air starts carrying it early, a low-pressure certainty moving through the force. He'd been brushing his teeth when it crystallized into something definite, and he'd looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and thought, soon. Then he'd finished brushing his teeth and gone downstairs and made everyone's breakfast and said nothing at all. When the owl came, it came through the kitchen window that Harry had quietly unlatched the night before, because he'd felt that too, the shape of an arriving thing, feathered and purposeful. It dropped the letter precisely on his plate, regarded him with the enormous dignity of a creature doing important work, accepted a piece of toast from his outstretched hand, and left. Vernon Dursley, sitting across the table with his newspaper, had watched all of this with the expression of a man whose blood pressure was doing things his doctor had specifically asked it not to. Harry picked up the letter. Green ink. His name and address written with a precision that suggested the writer was either very careful or using a self-writing quill, possibly both. He felt the magic in the parchment, old and layered, institutional, the enchantment of something that had been done the same way for centuries. He opened it and read it, and while he was reading it the force hummed quietly around him and the magic in his blood reached toward the magic in the letter the way a plant reaches toward light. Boy, Vernon said. One moment, Harry said, finishing the last paragraph. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. He was pleased to inform Mr. H. Potter that he had been accepted. Term would begin September 1st. The list of required books and equipment was enclosed. Harry set the letter down and picked up his toast. Well? Petunia said, and her voice was careful in the way it had been careful around him for the past 2 years, not afraid, not unkind, just calibrated. Like someone who'd revised their understanding of a situation and was still working out the new terms. It's a letter from a school, Harry said. A boarding school. I've been offered a place. Vernon found his voice. Absolutely not. Absolutely, categorically, I'm going, Harry said. He said it the way he said most things of substance, without heat, without particular emphasis, as simple fact delivered with the full and quiet weight of someone who had never once, in the 6 years since 2 dead Jedi had appeared in a cupboard, entertained the concept of being stopped. Vernon opened his mouth. Harry looked at him. Vernon closed his mouth. Petunia set her teacup down with a small click. She looked at Harry for a long moment, and he could feel in her the complicated architecture of a woman who'd spent 11 years being resentful and frightened of something she didn't understand, and underneath it, deeper and older, something that was neither resentment nor fear. Something that looked, if you felt it right, like grief. She'd loved her sister, once. You'll need things from the list, Petunia said at last. I assume there's somewhere to get them. There is, Harry said. Then. She picked up her teacup again. We'll see to it. Dudley, who had been staring at Harry since the owl arrived with the expression he'd been wearing more or less permanently for several months, the expression of someone who has been trying to complete a puzzle and suspects the crucial piece is one they weren't told about, said, very quietly, You're leaving. For most of the year, Harry said. I'll be back summers. Dudley turned back to his cereal. He ate 3 spoonfuls and then, without looking up, said, Fine. Which was, Harry thought, probably the most honest word Dudley Dursley had ever said to him. He told Obi-Wan and Yoda that night, though of course they'd felt the letter arrive through his own anticipation of it. Yoda seemed unsurprised, which was his default reaction to most things, and Obi-Wan seemed quietly pleased in the measured way he was pleased about most of Harry's developments, not effusively, not performatively, but with a warmth that radiated from him the way warmth radiated from sunlit stone. Hogwarts, Obi-Wan said, tasting the word. You should see it, Harry said. He'd looked at it in the Force already, reaching toward it the way he could reach across distance when the connection was strong enough. It's alive. The whole castle, everything in it has been soaked in magic for 1,000 years, and it's built up into something. It's like a personality. The building has a personality. Sentient structures, Obi-Wan said. Unusual, but not unheard of. The temple on Ilum had something similar. I want to go, Harry said. Not just because of the magic, though that. Because there'll be people my age who can feel things. Who know what this is. He paused. Emily's left now. Her family moved in August. He said it simply, the way he processed most losses, cleanly, without excess. Emily had gone back to Bristol. They'd said goodbye at the library, and Harry had pressed into her hands the address to write to and the one sentence she needed, which was, trust what you feel, it's real, and one day you'll understand it fully. She'd hugged him with both arms and gone, and Harry had stood on the pavement until she turned the corner and then he'd gone inside and told the Force he was grateful for her, which seemed like the right thing to do. What about Dumbledore, he said. Yoda stirred. Careful, with Dumbledore. I know he means well, Harry said. I can feel that from here. He's not the enemy. No, Yoda agreed. But a use, he has for you. And uses, even well-intentioned ones, can become cages. I know, Harry said. I'll handle it. Obi-Wan made the small internal sound that meant he believed Harry completely and was still going to worry, because he had never successfully stopped worrying about any Padawan in his career as a Jedi and death had not resolved this. We'll be with you, he said. At Hogwarts. The Force is everywhere, Harry. We're everywhere the Force is. I know, Harry said. He smiled, and it was the smile that had started at 5 in a blue-lit cupboard and had grown, over 6 years, into something that carried within it the accumulated warmth of everything he'd been given. I'm counting on it. Diagon Alley was extraordinary. Harry walked through the leaky cauldron behind Hagrid, who had arrived that morning on a flying motorbike, which Harry appreciated, and who was large and warm and somewhat overwhelmed himself, which Harry found endearing, and came out the other side of the brick archway and stopped. The alley stretched ahead of him, bright and loud and dense with magic, every shopfront humming with it, every person walking past carrying it in their blood and their hands and the objects they wore, and the whole thing together was like walking into a symphony after years of hearing individual instruments. He stood very still for 3 seconds, just letting the Force settle around it, feeling the shape of 1,000 years of magical life accumulated in one narrow cobblestone street. All right, Harry. Hagrid said, looking down at him with evident concern. Yes, Harry said. It's wonderful. Hagrid beamed like a man who had personally built Diagon Alley and was gratified by the reception. The day was full. Gringotts first, where the goblins regarded Harry with an assessment that was more interesting than the one they gave most customers. He felt them probing, with senses that were neither force nor magic but something older and more proprietary, something that said mine about gold and the way the sea says mine about water, and Harry returned the assessment with equivalent calm, and they proceeded. Then the wand. Ollivanders smelled of sawdust and something older than sawdust, and Mr. Ollivander himself had the quality of a man who had been old for so long that old wasn't quite the right word anymore. He looked at Harry with pale eyes that moved with an attention too focused to be entirely comfortable, and Harry felt him, felt the precision of the man's interest, the way every wandmaker who was any good was also, necessarily, a reader of people. Harry Potter, Ollivander said. I wondered when I'd see you. Here I am, Harry said. The trying of wands commenced, which was its own kind of revelation. The Force informed each attempt, Harry feeling the near resonance of each wand like a tuning fork finding its note, close, closer, not quite. He felt Obi-Wan's quiet amusement from wherever he was hovering at the edge of the day's events. 12 wands later, Ollivander produced the holly and phoenix feather, and Harry held it and felt something happen that wasn't quite what had been described, not sparks, not warmth exactly. Something more like recognition. The wand and the force and the magic braiding together through the point of contact, confirming each other. Curious, Ollivander said, and he said it the way people say things that genuinely surprise them, which Harry suspected was a rare experience for him. Very curious. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. He paused with the theatrical timing of someone who knows the weight of what he's about to say. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. Harry reached up and touched the lightning bolt scar. He'd spent 6 years feeling its shape in the Force, not as a wound anymore but as a marker, a point where something violent and enormous had been absorbed and transformed. It felt, if he was being honest, like a scene where two very different energies had been sewn together. Not destined, Harry said pleasantly. Suited. There's a difference. Ollivander looked at him with those pale eyes. Is there? Destiny suggests no choice, Harry said. Suited suggests compatibility. I have a great deal of choice. A pause. Then Ollivander smiled, slowly, and it was the smile of someone encountering an argument they haven't heard before. 7 galleons, Mr. Potter. September 1st arrived on a platform obscured with steam, full of families and noise and a particular quality of excitement that attaches to beginnings. Harry moved through King's Cross with his cart and his owl, Hedwig, snowy and imperious, bought from Elops with the first money he'd ever spent purely on himself, and he walked through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 like stepping from one conversation into another. He found a compartment and sat with Hedwig's cage on the seat beside him, and he looked out at the gathering crowd on the platform, and felt them all. Every magical person out there, felt the force sensitivity in a handful, felt the magic in them all, felt the whole complicated human texture of an entire world his age arriving at a train together. He'd been alone, in the meaningful sense, for 6 years. This was something different. Obi-Wan was beside him, a quiet presence. How does it feel? Like a lot, Harry said honestly. Then, good. A red-haired boy appeared in the compartment doorway, hesitant. He had the open face of someone who is naturally sociable and has not yet learned to moderate it. Everywhere else is full, he said. Can I? Yes, Harry said. Ron Weasley settled into the seat across from him with the relieved energy of someone who'd successfully navigated a social situation. He looked at Hedwig. He looked at Harry. He looked at the lightning bolt scar with an expression he was visibly trying to manage. You're Harry Potter, he said. Yes, Harry said. Right, Ron said. I'm Ron Weasley. Harry said, and they shook hands, and Obi-Wan made a small approving sound that Ron couldn't hear, because Ron was entirely right for this. The Force said so, clearly. Ron's presence was warm and uncomplicated, loyal in the way certain people simply are without having been taught to be, a quality that ran right through him like grain through wood. The compartment door opened again and a girl stood there with bushy brown hair and an expression of someone who has been very busy determining exactly which compartment to approach first. She looked between them. Have either of you seen a toad? A boy called Neville's lost one. She looked at Harry with sudden recognition. You're Harry Potter. I am, Harry said. You're Hermione Granger. And there's a toad under the seat, he pointed, without looking, 2nd row from the door. Hermione blinked. Then looked. Then reached under the seat and produced the toad, which was phlegmatic about its recovery. She stood up and looked at Harry with an expression that was shifting in real time from practiced composure to unconcealed interest. How did you know it was there? I felt it, Harry said simply. It was nervous. Toads have a very specific quality when they're nervous. A pause. That's not possible, Hermione said, then, is it? Apparently, Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment, recalibrating something behind her eyes. Then she returned the toad to Neville, a round-faced, slightly startled boy who had appeared in the doorway behind her, and both of them sat down and the compartment became, without anyone specifically deciding this, a natural unit of 4. Harry liked all 3 of them immediately, which the Force confirmed. It felt like sitting with people he'd been going to meet eventually. Hogwarts appeared around a bend in the lake, lit from within against the dark Scottish sky, and Harry looked at it from the boats with the focused attention of someone reading something. He could feel it, the vast accumulated life of the castle, the way 1,000 years of magic had settled into the stone and mortar and become something with its own awareness, ancient and watchful and deeply, fundamentally well-intentioned. It felt like standing in front of someone very old who had seen everything and was still interested in what was coming next. He smiled at it. He was fairly certain, in a way he couldn't have precisely articulated, that it smiled back. The sorting was its own experience. Harry sat under the hat and felt it settle onto his head with the manner of an entity that was very confident in its ability to assess things, and he felt it reach into him, and then he felt it stop. It had been expecting a mind to read. It had found something that read it back. "Oh," the hat said, in his head. Just that. "Oh. Hello," Harry thought at it. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds during which Harry was aware of the hat doing a very thorough revision of its approach. "This is unusual," it said. "I've been told that." 2 signatures, the hat said, with the manner of a scholar unexpectedly finding a double-authored manuscript. "Force and magic. I've been in existence for 1,000 years and I've never," it seemed to collect itself. "Well. Where to put you?" "Wherever you think best," Harry thought at it. "I'll manage either way." "Gryffindor," the hat said, and then, quieter, just for him, though the sorting is almost academic. "You are already something beyond the houses." "Gryffindor," it announced to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry pulled the hat off, handed it back, walked to his table, and sat between Ron and a girl called Parvati who immediately offered him a chicken leg. He accepted it. Hermione sat across from him looking alert. Neville materialized at the end of the table, toadless but present. It felt, irrationally and precisely, like coming home. Professor McGonagall was excellent. Harry liked her immediately, the way you like people who have very strong standards and apply them to themselves more rigorously than to anyone else. She taught transfiguration with the focused intensity of someone who considered it a serious discipline and considered half measures an insult to the subject. She was also, Harry noted within approximately 6 minutes, a registered animagus, and she had the particular force quality of someone who had been 2 things at once for a very long time and had fully integrated them. She watched Harry's first transfiguration attempt with the expression of someone who had prepared for the usual range of outcomes and received a different one. He'd felt the shape of what was required before she finished explaining it, the force offering him the structure of the change, the magic filling it in. The match became a needle between one breath and the next, cleanly silver, no hesitation. McGonagall picked it up and turned it over in her fingers. She looked at Harry over her spectacles with an expression that was not quite neutral. "Have you done this before, Mr. Potter?" "No," Harry said honestly. "But I could feel what it needed." "You could feel," she stopped. Composed herself. "See me after class." When the rest of the students had gone, she sat across from him and said, carefully, "The trace on your magic has been producing unusual readings for several years. The headmaster was aware of them." "I know," Harry said. The reading suggested practice. Deliberate application. Controlled output, not accidental magic. "That's correct." A pause. McGonagall was many things, but she was not someone who wasted time being surprised when she could be gathering information instead. "Who trained you?" Harry considered how to answer this. The truth was entirely true and would be entirely difficult to explain. He decided to give her the part that was most immediately useful. "I've had guidance," he said. "In the Force, that's the energy that connects all living things. I'm Force-sensitive, as well as magically gifted. The two seem to work together." "The Force," McGonagall repeated. "I know it sounds," it sounds extremely unusual, she said, crisply. It does not, to be clear, sound like something I intend to dismiss. I have been a witch for 60 years and a cat for 40 of them. The range of possible experience is wide. She folded her hands. Does the headmaster know the extent of your training? I believe he suspects something, Harry said. He should. His cat fell off a windowsill. McGonagall's mouth did something complicated. That will be all, Mr. Potter. Thank you, Professor, Harry said, and left. Snape was a different matter entirely. Harry had felt him before he'd seen him, had felt the shape of him in the great hall at the welcome feast, the complex dark gravity of a person who had been through something enormous and come out the other side changed in ways they were still cataloguing. He was not, Harry determined with some care, a bad man. He was a man who had made terrible choices and survived them, and the surviving had cost him a specific ongoing price that he paid daily without any particular expectation of relief. He also had a personal investment in Harry that Harry felt immediately, and that explained the way Snape looked at him in that first potions lesson, not hatred, though it wore hatred's face. Something more complicated. Grief wearing hate's coat because grief without the coat was too cold to stand. Potter, Snape said, at the front of the class, and his voice carried the careful weight of a man preparing to prove a point. Tell me. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class held its breath. Hermione's hand had shot up beside Harry, which he appreciated. She'd become, in 3 weeks, the most precise thinker he'd ever discussed anything with, including Obi-Wan, and that was not a sentence he made lightly. Harry looked at Snape steadily. He felt the shape of the question, the intention behind it, the trap at the bottom of it, and underneath the trap, the genuine test. Draught of living death, Harry said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. You'd also get a rather elegant alchemical metaphor, if you're interested in those. Asphodel is a plant associated with death and grief in classical tradition, and wormwood suggests bitterness. Combined, they produce something that mimics death. The symbolism is not accidental. A silence. Snape's expression did not change, but the force changed around him, a subtle shift in the quality of his attention. He had expected either ignorance or rote memorization. He'd received something else. Where did you find that? He said. Not how did you know. Where did you find it? Like it was something that needed locating. I've been reading, Harry said simply. I find potions interesting. The interaction between intention and chemistry, the way the brewer's state of mind affects the outcome. It's similar to something I already understood. Is it? Snape said, and there were about 7 different things happening in those 2 words. It is, Harry said. I'd be glad to discuss it sometime, if you were inclined. Another silence. Snape looked at him for a long moment with eyes that were extremely dark and extremely capable of reading people and were currently engaged in a rapid assessment. Harry met the look without challenge, without aggression, without the performed deference that Snape was clearly accustomed to and clearly despised. Then, 10 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, in the tone of a man doing something against his better judgment. Sit down. Ron, next to Harry, was staring at him with the expression of someone who has just watched a person stick their hand into a fire and pull out a pear. How? Ron said, in a whisper. I prepared, Harry said. You prepared for Snape? For everything, really, Harry said. It's a habit. The first week at Hogwarts produced 3 significant events. The first was flying lessons, which Harry had been looking forward to in a specific and personal way. He'd been practicing control of movement through the Force for years, not levitation of himself, exactly, but the extension of awareness into space that was the prerequisite for it. When he swung onto the broomstick and pushed off from the ground and felt the castle drop away beneath him, the Force connected him to the broom immediately, seamlessly, the way it connected him to anything he needed to move. He went up faster than the others, corrected his angle instinctively, and pulled a controlled circle around the Quidditch pitch with a smoothness that made Madame Hooch stop blowing her whistle. He came down and she looked at him with professional appreciation and told him he was a natural. "I've had some preparation," he said. "It shows," she said. Draco Malfoy, who had been watching from his broom with an expression that kept shifting between calculated interest and instinctive competitiveness, said, "Where'd you learn that?" "I practiced," Harry said. Malfoy studied him. The Force offered Harry the shape of him, not a bad person in any fundamental sense, not cruel the way people who enjoy cruelty are cruel, but someone who had been given a very specific set of beliefs from very young by people he trusted completely, and who was beginning to encounter evidence that complicated those beliefs and didn't yet know what to do with it. He was, in fact, more interesting than he appeared, and more conflicted. "You're better than the Weasley," Malfoy said. "Ron," Harry said pleasantly, "is going to be excellent. He's got good instincts. He just doesn't know it yet." Malfoy blinked. He'd been looking for a fight and received a straight answer, which was not the terrain he prepared for. "You're odd," he said. "Probably," Harry agreed. The second event was the troll on Halloween, which came and went somewhat faster than it might have otherwise. Harry felt the creature before the alarm was raised, felt it in the dungeons, the enormous dumb weight of it, moving with the particular carelessness of something very large that had never needed to be careful. He found Hermione in the girls' bathroom before the troll did, walked in ahead of it, stood in the center of the room with his wand in his hand and his left hand open, and when the troll came through the door he looked at it with calm green eyes and, without particular drama, lifted it 3 feet off the floor with the Force, walked it backward out into the corridor, and set it down again. It sat there, confused, in the way trolls are confused, which is the way of creatures that don't have the neural architecture for existential questioning but feel very strongly that something is wrong. McGonagall, arriving at a run with Snape and Quirrell behind her, found Harry, Ron, and Hermione in the corridor watching a troll sit on the floor looking bewildered. She looked at the troll. She looked at Harry. She seemed to be running through a list of possible explanations and discarding all but one. "Mr. Potter," she said. "It's fine," Harry said. "No one was hurt." "How? I'd rather not explain in front of the troll," Harry said. "It seems rude." Behind McGonagall, Snape looked at Harry with the particular calculating attention that he'd brought to most of their interactions since that first potions lesson, not hostile exactly, but the look of a man who was continuously revising a hypothesis. From the corner of his eye, Harry felt Quirrell doing something different. Not just watching. Measuring. With a cold, specific interest that came from somewhere deep and dark in the man, from the thing wrapped around him like a second shadow that Harry had felt since the feast and had been watching with quiet, patient certainty. Voldemort. Not present in any way that could be confirmed. A possession, or something close to it, incomplete and fractured and yet unmistakably the same dark gravity that had been pressing on the edges of the magical world since before Harry was born. He'd felt it at the feast and said nothing, because the time for it wasn't right, and because he wanted to understand the shape of the threat completely before he moved. He met Quirrell's gaze for one brief moment. Let the Force go out through his eyes, just enough for the thing inside Quirrell to feel it. "I know," he communicated, in no particular language. Quirrell looked away first. The third event happened quietly, on a Thursday night in November, and mattered more than either of the others. He'd been awake and restless, not unhappily, just awake, the way he was sometimes when the Force was particularly active, and he'd walked the corridors without a map or a cloak, because the Force was perfectly functional as a navigation system and the castle cooperated with him in the specific way that Hogwarts cooperated with people it had decided to like. The staircases moved for him, not against him. The right doors opened. The castle was a very old personality, and like most very old personalities, it responded to people who were genuinely present. He found the room by following a pull in the Force, which led him through a corridor on the 3rd floor and through a door that appeared between a suit of armor and a tapestry, and inside was a mirror. The Mirror of Erist. He didn't know its name yet, but he felt it immediately, felt the age of it, the weight of it, the specific enchantment that ran through it like a current. He walked up to it slowly and looked. In the mirror, his parents looked back. Lily Potter had his eyes. He'd known this intellectually and now he felt it viscerally, the green of them across 10 years of absence, the warmth in them that he recognized because he felt it in himself every day and had never known where it came from. James Potter had his hair and a jaw that Harry would grow into eventually, and both of them were looking at him with an expression that the mirror had constructed from whatever truth it had access to, and Harry was quite sure it was accurate. He stood in front of it for a long time. He wasn't broken by it, wasn't devastated, wasn't lost in it, wasn't destroyed. He had the tools that come from 6 years of learning to sit with loss and be present inside it instead of trying to get through it. He felt what there was to feel, completely, let it move through him the way Obi-Wan had taught him to let hard things move through him, and he stood with it. But he also said, quietly, to the empty room, "I miss you. I know I don't remember you. I miss you anyway." The candle nearest the mirror burned, very briefly, the exact gold of his cupboard at home. He turned to go, and Dumbledore was in the doorway. He was exactly what Harry had expected and more. Tall, ancient, carrying the accumulated weight of an enormous mind and an enormous history, wearing both lightly the way very powerful people sometimes did. He looked at Harry with blue eyes that were perceptive in a way that went past ordinary intelligence into something close to, but not quite, Force sensitivity. Not Jedi, not wizard magic, something between them that was simply the particular acuity of a very old man who had paid very close attention to everything for a very long time. "How long have you been standing there?" Harry said. "Long enough to admire the composure," Dumbledore said. He came forward, and he moved the way people moved in Harry's Force sense when they were genuinely present and genuinely themselves, no performance, no concealment. "Do you know what it shows?" "The deepest desire of whoever looks into it," Harry said. "Obviously." Dumbledore's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Obviously. It's also an enchantment you put here deliberately," Harry said. "You've been watching me since October. The trace readings. You're animagus." He looked at Dumbledore with the calm directness that was simply his mode of being. "I'd rather we talked openly, if you're willing." A pause. In Harry's experience, pauses from Dumbledore were not uncertainty but computation, the man processing at speeds that looked like stillness. "You're 11 years old," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "And you have a plan for me, and I have some thoughts about that plan, and I think we'll get along much better if we put those things on the table rather than you watching through cats while I pretend not to notice." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression then, something warm and, Harry felt clearly, surprised. Genuinely surprised, which was rare for him. "Your thoughts about my plan," Dumbledore said, carefully. "You want me to face Voldemort," Harry said. "You believe I must. The prophecy suggests I'm the only one who can. I don't think any of that is wrong." He held Dumbledore's gaze without aggression and without submission. "What I want you to know is that I'm not unprepared. I haven't been unprepared for a long time. And I will face him, on my own terms, when the time is right, in the way that gives the best outcome. Not as a piece being moved on a board." Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. The mirror stood between them and showed them both nothing but themselves. "You said you have teachers," Dumbledore said at last. He said it slowly, testing the edge of it. "I do," Harry said. "The best kind. The kind who tell you the truth about hard things and trust you to hold it. And they've told you about, the dark things. About Voldemort." "Enough," Harry said. "Enough to understand the shape of it. More as I need to know it." Another pause. Dumbledore looked at him, and Harry could feel the man recalibrating, could feel the plan, the architecture of it, flexing to accommodate something it hadn't been designed for. Not angrily. With the genuine intellectual curiosity of someone who has just encountered a variable they hadn't included. "I have an item in this school," Dumbledore said, "that Voldemort wants. Correction, that the part of him currently present in this school wants." "The Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. "Just once. Then, you know. I guessed, Harry said honestly. Nicholas Flamel, the stone, the protections on the third floor. The logic was straightforward, once you had the pieces. How did you get the pieces? Library, Harry said. Hermione helped. Dumbledore laughed. It came out of him genuinely, a full, real laugh, and Harry felt it in the force as the sound of a man who had not laughed like that in some time. Of course she did, he said. You should speak to her too, Harry said. Not because she needs managing, she doesn't. Because she deserves to understand the shape of things. She's going to figure it out herself regardless, and being kept ignorant of things she's already working toward is just inefficient. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes, and Harry felt something in the old man settle, not surrender, not capitulation, something more like recognition. The recognition of someone who has been trying to protect a child and has realized, with a combination of relief and wistfulness, that the child doesn't need quite the kind of protection he had in mind. You are not what I expected, Dumbledore said. What did you expect? A beat. A child. I am a child, Harry said. I'm also prepared. Both can be true. He looked at the mirror one more time, at his parents' faces, warm and present in glass and enchantment, and then he turned away from it with the complete ease of someone who has learned to carry love without being crushed by it. Good night, Professor, he said. Good night, Harry, Dumbledore said, and the name landed the way it had from Obi-Wan in a cupboard 6 years ago, like something being given, not managed. Harry walked out into the corridor and the castle accommodated him, stairs moving, torches brightening slightly, the 1,000-year-old personality of Hogwarts doing what it did with people it had decided to claim. Above him, in the luminous and invisible country of the living Force, Obi-Wan and Yoda moved with him through the fire-lit dark, and the Force sang its one note between all things, and Harry Potter walked through his new home like he'd always known the way. Chapter 4, What Waits Below. December came to Hogwarts the way it came to old places, slowly, and with conviction. Snow settled into the castle's crenellations and stayed there. The lake froze at the edges. The corridors smelled of pine resin and candle wax, and the enchanted ceiling of the great hall cycled through iron-gray skies and occasional grudging stars, and the whole school wrapped itself in the particular atmosphere of a place that had been doing Christmas for 1,000 years and had developed strong opinions about it. Harry had been watching Quirrell for 2 months. Not obviously. Not in any way that would register to a casual observer, or to Quirrell himself, or to the fragmented dark consciousness wrapped around Quirrell's soul like a parasite that hadn't quite finished consuming its host. He watched the way the Force watched, passively, continuously, the way you're aware of a sound that's always present without consciously listening for it. He felt the shape of what lived in Quirrell, the way it pressed against the edges of the man, the way it grew sharper and more restless when it was near the third-floor corridor, near the trapdoor, near whatever it could feel on the other side of Dumbledore's protections. He'd told Obi-Wan and Yoda everything. He'd told them the specific quality of Voldemort's presence, the fractured, desperate character of it, not the full dark power of the man who had torn the wizarding world apart 14 years ago, but something reduced and hungry and furious about its own reduction. Piece of him, it is, Yoda had said. Part of a soul, not all. Weakened. But dangerous still, the way a wounded thing is dangerous. More dangerous than a whole thing, Obi-Wan had said. Desperation is not a quality that makes dark power safer. Harry had spent those 2 months also doing something that most of his classmates were doing with considerably less strategic purpose, learning. The first-year curriculum was, in terms of raw challenge, somewhat below what 3 years of intensive Force training had built in him, but the specifics were new, the incantations, the wand technique, the particular grammar of formal spellcasting. He approached it the way he approached everything, thoroughly, without shortcuts, because shortcuts were fine for things that didn't matter and Hogwarts magic was going to matter. He was also, quietly, and in ways that didn't announce themselves, teaching Ron and Hermione. Not formally. He didn't set up sessions or explain what he was doing. He sat next to them in the library and asked questions that guided them toward the connections between subjects. He practiced with Ron in the common room and noticed what Ron's instincts were and pointed at them when they were good and said nothing about the ones that weren't yet, because Ron's confidence was the variable that mattered most in his magic, and the worst thing you could do with confidence was chip at it. He and Hermione had arguments that were less arguments than two people finding the sharpest version of an idea by pressing it from opposite sides, and they both came away better for it. Neville he helped differently. Neville's magic was genuine and powerful, and thoroughly convinced it wasn't, because Neville had been made to doubt himself by people who should have known better, and what Neville needed wasn't technique so much as someone to stand next to him and be completely unsurprised when he succeeded. Harry provided this. When Neville's herbology work produced results that left Professor Sprout momentarily speechless, Harry said simply, "I knew you'd get that." "You couldn't have," Neville said. "I could, actually," Harry said, and he smiled, and the Force confirmed what the smile said. Quidditch happened. Wood had spotted him flying in the second week of November and had descended on him with the evangelical fervor of a man who has found the piece his puzzle was missing. Harry had been made seeker for the Gryffindor team with a speed that bypassed several rules about first years and was authorized by McGonagall with the expression of someone choosing pragmatism over protocol. His first match was against Slytherin in the second week of November, and Harry played the way he did everything, with the complete, present attention of someone who was not performing, not showing off, not managing how they appeared, simply doing the thing as well as it could be done. The Force made him an extraordinary seeker. Not because it let him cheat, but because finding the snitch was a problem of attention, of finding the one thing that mattered amid everything that didn't, and that was, quite precisely, what he'd been training to do for 6 years. He could feel the snitch before he could see it, a small bright dart of movement in the Force's texture, and when his broom went for it, it went clean and direct with nothing wasted. He caught it in 11 minutes. Wood had clapped him on the back so enthusiastically it left a mark. Ron had been incandescent. Hermione had stated that the physics of his final dive were unlikely, and Harry had agreed they were a bit unusual, and she'd narrowed her eyes and filed this away. What Harry noticed, from above the pitch, was Snape in the stands, muttering incantations under his breath that the Force read as counter-jinxing work. He'd tracked the source of the jinx on his broom mid-flight, felt it clearly, a targeted interference aimed at the connection between him and the broom, and he'd balanced against it with the Force without breaking stride, and he'd looked across the stands toward its origin and found Quirrell's eyes on him and held them, calmly, for 3 seconds while his broom steadied beneath him. Quirrell had looked away. Snape, unaware that he hadn't actually been needed, continued his counter-jinxing for another full minute, which Harry thought was honorable. The thing that moved the timeline was Hermione. She arrived at the breakfast table in the first week of December with the expression she wore when she had solved something that had been resisting solution, which was an expression Harry had learned to give his full attention. "Nicholas Flamel," she said, and put a library book down next to Harry's porridge. "I found him." Harry looked at the passage she'd marked. "Read it." He already knew who Flamel was, had known for 2 months, but he let Hermione have the discovery because it was hers and she'd earned it, and because watching Hermione land on a conclusion she'd been working toward was like watching someone else's magic do something beautiful. Ron leaned over. "Read it." "So Flamel's the one who made the stone," he said. "And it's here. Behind Fluffy." "Behind several other things after Fluffy, presumably," Hermione said. "Dumbledore's protections," Harry said. Hermione turned to look at him. "You knew already," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a scientific observation. "I had a conversation with Dumbledore in November," Harry said. "About the stone. About who wants it." Ron and Hermione both went very still in the way they did when information they'd been working toward arrived ahead of schedule. "Voldemort," Harry said, quietly enough for just the 3 of them. "He's not gone. He's been here since September," inside Quirrell. A pause. Ron went pale in the way Ron went pale, which was completely and rapidly. Hermione's jaw set in the way Hermione's jaw set, which was like watching someone decide something. "You've known since September," she said. "Yes. And you've been, just going to classes? Catching snitches?" Learning the shape of the problem before acting on it, Harry said. Moving before you understand something fully is how you make it worse. He looked at them both. Also, I needed to understand the protections. What's between the trapdoor and the stone? So that when I go through, I don't waste time. When you go through, Ron said. Yes. You're planning to go through Dumbledore's protections and face Voldemort, Ron said, in the tone of someone checking that they've received the information correctly. Yes, Harry said. Though fragment of Voldemort is more accurate. He's not whole. He's desperate and reduced and attached to a nervous defense against the dark arts teacher, and I have 6 years of preparation and 2 excellent teachers and he doesn't know any of that. He ate a spoonful of porridge. The odds are fine. Hermione was looking at him in a way she sometimes looked at him, the way that meant she was updating her estimate of what he was, which was a thing she did periodically and which never quite seemed to complete. Your teachers, she said. The ones you've mentioned before but never explained. I'll tell you, Harry said. When we have more time. The short version is that they exist in the Force, the energy that connects living things, and they've been with me since I was 5, and they are the most important people in my life, and they're the reason I'm not frightened right now. Ron looked at him. Opened his mouth. Closed it. Then, I want the long version sometime. You'll get it, Harry said. Obi-Wan and Yoda were with him when he made the decision. Not that night, 2 weeks later, when December was fully installed and most of the school had gone home for Christmas and the castle was quiet in the way only very large places are quiet when they're mostly empty. Harry had stayed. Ron had stayed too, the first time in a long time the Burrow hadn't claimed him for Christmas, and when Harry had asked him why he'd simply shrugged and said, figured you might need someone. Harry had felt something move in his chest at that. The Force confirmed it was the right thing to feel. He made his decision on the 22nd of December, when he felt Quirrell move past the gargoyle at the end of the 3rd floor corridor at 2 in the morning with the purpose of someone who has stopped calculating and started acting. He sat up in his bed in the empty dormitory and was still for a moment, checking the Force the way you check the weather, reading the full shape of the situation. It was time. Not because Quirrell had forced it. Because the Force said clearly, in its wordless and completely precise way, that every variable had now reached the state in which action was the right choice. Quirrell was moving. The stone was at risk. The protections were known. Harry was ready. He got up, dressed in the dark, picked up his wand, and went downstairs. Ron was in the common room, awake, sitting in front of the dying fire with a chess set in his lap and the expression of someone who had been waiting. Thought it might be tonight, Ron said. Harry looked at him. You don't have to come. I know, Ron said. He stood up, set down the chess set. But the chess is going to be my bit. I know that room. I've been thinking about it since you told us about the protections. You've been memorizing the chess room. In my head, yeah. Every piece, how it'll move, what it'll sacrifice. Ron said this with the quiet certainty of someone who is operating entirely in their area of strength. I'll get you through the board. What happens after is yours. Harry nodded once. Thank you, he said, and meant it completely. They went to get Hermione, who was also awake, sitting up in the 1st floor corridor outside the common room entrance because she'd been sleeping lightly and had felt something. She couldn't have named what, but it had woken her and she'd made tea and been waiting. She didn't say I told you it would be tonight. She said, I've been thinking about the potions room. The logic puzzle. I can solve it in under a minute. I know, Harry said. You should let me try first, even if you could solve it without me. I know that too, Harry said. Hermione, I brought you because I want you here. Not as backup. Because you're the sharpest mind I know and this matters and you should be part of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, and the expression she wore for the rest of the walk to the 3rd floor was not frightened exactly, but bright with the particular energy of someone doing something that is both dangerous and completely right. Fluffy was enormous and genuinely terrible, 3 enormous heads full of teeth, and Harry looked at it for the 2 seconds it took to feel the specific enchantment running through it, the music enchantment, the sleep trigger, and then he sent a thread of force outward, a careful quiet resonance at exactly the frequency the enchantment was keyed to, and the 3 heads went down one by one like lights going out. "That's one way," Hermione said. They went through the trapdoor. The Devil's Snare was immediately enthusiastic about strangling them, which Harry considered rather inhospitable given the circumstances. Hermione produced a bright flame with a crispness that Harry noted was significantly stronger than her first-year theory suggested she should be capable of. She'd been practicing, clearly, in ways that went beyond the curriculum, which surprised him not at all. The plant recoiled. They dropped through. The Flying Keys room was Ron's first, then Harry's. Ron mapped the pattern with the same focused instinct he brought to chess, identifying the correct key by its bent wing before Harry had finished scanning the force for it. Harry caught it in 4 seconds flat and the door unlocked before anyone had to do anything impressive. The troll was already unconscious, which either meant Dumbledore had anticipated the approach or someone had been through earlier. Harry noted this, filed it as information, held it. Then the chess room, and Ron squared his shoulders and walked out onto the board and became, in a way Harry had not seen from him before, completely himself. The Ron who second-guessed his friendships and worried about money and the size of his family's house vanished entirely, and what remained was the Ron who saw the whole board at once and moved inside it with absolute certainty, who called the pieces forward with the authority of someone who had been playing this game since before he had words for it. Harry watched him and felt an enormous quiet pride that was entirely separate from the Force and was simply human. Ron sacrificed himself to the night with the calculation of someone who had known the moment he stepped on the board that this was how it ended, and he did it without flinching, and when Harry and Hermione ran to him he was dazed but present. "Go," he said. "I'm fine. Bit of a headache." "Go, Harry." Harry knelt beside him for one moment. He put his hand on Ron's shoulder, and the force moved through the contact, not a healing exactly, but a steadying, something warm and present that pushed back against the shock. Ron's eyes cleared slightly. "You were brilliant," Harry said. Ron laughed, slightly unsteadily. "I know. Go get him." Hermione stayed with Ron. They'd agreed on this. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone who wants to say something important and hasn't found the exact right words for it. "Be careful," she said. Then, "Actually, I don't think careful is the right word for you. Be yourself." "I intend to," Harry said. He went through the door alone. The potions room was Hermione's puzzle and Harry had walked through it in 20 seconds, the logic clear through the force before he'd finished reading the parchment, the second smallest bottle, the poison eliminated by the temperatures of the other 2, the correct path forward. He drank it. The cold hit his chest and spread and he stepped through the black flame and into the last room. The mirror of Eriste was there. Harry stopped in the doorway and looked at it, and for one moment he felt the strangeness of this, of coming back to the mirror that had shown him his parents' faces, but this time with the stone as the objective and the mirror as the mechanism of protection. Dumbledore's logic was elegant, Harry thought. The stone would only be visible to someone who wanted to find it but not use it. To a pure enough want. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror, and Quirrell's hands were trembling, and the thing wearing him from the inside was furious. "Potter." Quirrell's voice had changed, the stutter was gone, had been a performance apparently, and what remained was a voice that carried a coldness that was entirely the thing inside him rather than the man himself. "I wondered whether you'd come. I felt you moving at 2 this morning," Harry said, walking into the room without any particular rush. "I thought I'd let you get a head start on the fire traps. The Devil's Snare is tedious." Quirrell turned to look at him, and Harry felt the assessment in it, the thing inside Quirrell scanning him, reading him, doing what dark intelligence did when it encountered something it hadn't fully predicted. "A child," it said. "Consistently underestimated," Harry agreed. "I've stopped finding it offensive and started finding it useful." "You feel different," Quirrell said. He was being made to speak by the thing inside him, his body a puppet, his eyes full of a suffering he could do nothing about. Harry felt the shape of this, the remnant of the real Quirrell, pressed into a corner of himself, and felt a specific sadness about it. Quirrell was not innocent, he'd made choices that had allowed this, but the choices of a frightened, ambitious man and the choices of the soul that had hijacked him were not the same thing. "I'm going to ask you to stop this," Harry said. Not to Quirrell. To what was inside him. "You're not going to reach the stone. The mirror won't show it to you. And I'm not going to let you leave this room with the intent to hurt anyone." "You're 11 years old," the thing said. 12 in a month, Harry said. "Though the number doesn't really speak to the training. You want to know what's different about me?" He held Quirrell's gaze with complete steadiness. "I'm not only a wizard. I'm also a Jedi, or as close to one as this universe has managed. The Force is in me, alongside the magic, and they've been working together since I was 5, and I have had 2 of the best teachers in either universe for 6 years." He paused. "I know you're not at full strength. I know what you are, a fragment. A piece of someone, not a whole person. I know you're frightened about what that means." A silence. "You know nothing," the thing said, but there was something in the register of it, a crack, very small, that the Force identified as something the voice was covering. "You made Horcruxes," Harry said, and he said it quietly and without drama because it was information, not a weapon. "Pieces of soul, stored in objects. You're not whole because you deliberately unmade yourself in pieces. What's wearing Quirrell right now is one fragment among several, and you're frightened, you've always been frightened, that's why you made them, that the fragments might not be enough." Quirrell's hands had stopped shaking. His face had gone very still in the particular way of a body in which the controlling intelligence has focused itself entirely on one thing. "Show me the stone," the voice commanded, and Quirrell moved toward Harry with his hands outstretched. Harry stepped sideways, the same movement he'd made with Dudley behind the sports shed, years ago, the step and pivot that redirected rather than resisted, and the Force came with him. Quirrell's outstretched hands passed through empty air, and Harry's left hand came up and the push was not large, it didn't need to be, it redirected Quirrell's momentum with the economy of someone who has learned exactly how much force a situation requires and never uses more. Quirrell stumbled. Turned. Looked at Harry with those eyes that had 2 people in them. "You can't win," it said. "I'm not trying to win," Harry said. "I'm trying to end this without killing you. Both of you, if I can." He looked at Quirrell's face. "Professor Quirrell, I know you're still in there. You let this in. You can put it out." "He can't," the thing said. "He's mine." "The Force disagrees," Harry said. He reached toward the mirror with his right hand and it shifted as he looked into it, not the surface, but the enchantment within it, the logic of it. The stone was inside it, visible only to pure enough intention. He felt the enchantment read him, felt it move through the Force and the magic both, and felt it arrive at a decision about him. The stone dropped into his palm with a small, decisive weight. It was warm. Red gold, pulsing faintly, and the magic in it was extraordinary. Centuries of Flammel's work condensed into something the size of a walnut, the specific magic of transformation, the alchemy of changing one thing into another. He felt it in his blood and felt the Force move through it and set it in his pocket. Quirrell screamed, not Quirrell exactly, the thing inside him, a thin, furious sound, and launched himself at Harry with both hands aimed for Harry's face. What happened when the hands connected with Harry's skin was not what either of them expected. Harry had been prepared for pain. He'd spent 12 years with something residing in his scar, and he'd learned its quality, and he'd felt the fragment in Quirrell across a semester of careful attention, and he'd known this moment was coming. What he hadn't fully anticipated was what the fusion of force and magic would do when it came into direct contact with a fragment of dark soul. The Force, at its nature, was the energy of living things. The magic in Harry's blood, the ambient personal warmth of it, the light he could make from nothing, it was the same energy, differently expressed. And the thing in Quirrell was the opposite of this, it was the deliberate, chose a negation of that energy, a piece of a soul that had unmade itself in the pursuit of persistence. When they touched, the light happened. Not metaphorically. The room went white gold and the force moved through Harry's hands like a current through water and through Quirrell's hands and into the thing inside him, and the fragment, the reduced, desperate, frightened fragment of Tom Riddle that had been clinging to a dying teacher's soul like a barnacle on a sinking ship, came out. Not destroyed. Not consumed. Pulled free. It was a terrible sound, and a terrible sight, the dark shape of it separating from Quirrell and hanging in the air of the chamber for a moment, not a person, not quite, but the remnant of one, and Harry looked at it with complete composure and felt, clearly and without ambiguity, the sorrow of the thing. The grief underneath the darkness. The boy who had been frightened of death and had done unforgivable things because he thought they would protect him from it. It doesn't work, Harry said softly, to the fragment. The Horcruxes. Living in pieces. It doesn't make you safe. It just makes you less. The fragment flickered. I know you can hear me, Harry said. Whatever you are now, you were a person once. There are still pieces of that person. I'm not going to tell you what you did was forgivable, it wasn't. But you can stop adding to it. The fragment hung there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then it dispersed, quietly, into the air of the chamber, the way fog disperses when the temperature changes, not a death, not exactly, something more like a release, a decision to stop holding a shape that had never been wholesome to begin with. The chamber went dim again. Quirrell collapsed to the floor. Harry caught him with the force before he hit the stone, lowered him gently, checked his pulse, felt the quality of what was left in him. Damaged, profoundly so, the kind of damage that came from being used as a vehicle for something it was never meant to carry. But alive. His soul his own, tattered and thin and blinking into the void left by the thing that had occupied it, but present. You're going to be all right, Harry told him, with the specific certainty of someone who means it but acknowledges it may not be entirely accurate. Then, help is coming. He stood up and looked around the empty chamber, at the mirror and the dying torches, at the stone solid and warm in his pocket. Well, he said, to the room. Well, Obi-Wan said, from very nearby, warm and present in the Force the way he'd been warm and present for 6 years. Did I do that right? Harry said. A pause. You showed mercy to a fragment of a dark soul that tried to kill you, Obi-Wan said. You secured the stone. You spoke to the piece of a person inside the monster and addressed it as a person. You did not lose control and you did not compromise yourself. The light surprised me, Harry said. The light surprised me too, Obi-Wan said. I didn't know it could do that. Neither did I. Harry looked at his hands, the ones that had burned white gold and pulled a dark fragment from a man's soul. The Force and the magic together. Not fighting it, just opening the channel and letting it do what it did. You'll need to understand it better, Obi-Wan said. I know, Harry said. Something to work on. Yoda, from somewhere close in the living Force, said, proud, I am. Very proud. Harry stood in the chamber under Hogwarts with the Philosopher's Stone in his pocket and 2 dead Jedi warmly present in the air around him, and he thought about Quirrell on the floor behind him and the fragment that had been Voldemort dispersing into nothing, and about his parents' faces in the mirror, and about all of it. Then he picked up the stone, and climbed back through the black flame, and went to find his friends. Dumbledore arrived in the chamber at what Harry estimated was approximately 40 minutes after the fragment's dispersal, moving with more speed than his age suggested possible for a man of his apparent serenity. He found Harry sitting on the floor next to Quirrell, who was unconscious but breathing, with the stone in his hand and an expression of someone who has finished a task and is waiting for the next conversation. The headmaster looked at the chamber. He looked at Quirrell. He looked at Harry. He looked at the stone. You found it, Dumbledore said. The mirror showed it to me, Harry said. He held it up. I'd like to give it back to Nicholas Flamel with the recommendation that it be destroyed. You were planning that anyway, I think, but I wanted to say it so we were aligned. Dumbledore sat down, which was notable because there was nowhere to sit in the chamber and he managed it anyway, with the air of a man who has decided that sitting is what this moment requires and the furniture is simply being unhelpful. He looked at Harry for a long moment. "Tom Riddle's fragment," he said. "Gone," Harry said. "Not destroyed in the way you'd destroy an ordinary dark entity. Released, more accurately. I spoke to it." Dumbledore's expression was unreadable in the way of someone cycling through many readings very rapidly. "You spoke to it." "There was a person once," Harry said simply. "Underneath everything he did, there was a frightened person who made terrible choices. That doesn't excuse the choices. But it changes what the right response is." He paused. "I couldn't have destroyed it in good conscience without trying to address it as something that was once human. It would have set a precedent for myself that I didn't want to set." Dumbledore was very quiet. "There are other Horcruxes," Harry said. "The fragment told me, not in words. The Force read the shape of what it was. Pieces of his soul in objects. We'll need to find them. I'd like to do that together, if you're willing to actually work together rather than operate parallel plans." "You are offering to work with me," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that Harry's Force sense read as something close to humility. "I'm offering to share information and coordinate," Harry said. "I don't need managing, Professor. I need a partner who has been here longer and knows the wizarding world better than I do. That's genuinely valuable. But the plan goes both ways." Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's hand, and then at Harry, and then at Quirrell on the floor, and the quality of his gaze was the quality of a man updating something fundamental. "I think," he said slowly, "that I owe you an apology." "You don't," Harry said. "You were trying to protect a child you thought was unprepared. You were wrong about the unprepared part, but the trying to protect part was right. It's forgivable." A pause that stretched long enough to carry weight. "Who are your teachers?" Dumbledore said. And this time it wasn't a question with an angle on it or a move in a larger game. It was simply a man asking something he genuinely needed to know. Harry looked at him for a moment. "Then, I'll introduce you," he said. "When the time is right. You'll understand when you meet them, it'll make more sense in person than in explanation." He stood up and offered Dumbledore the stone. "Put it somewhere safer next year," he said. "The Devil's Snare was a nice touch, but the chess room is the real defense. Don't change that. Ron Weasley is going to be extraordinary." Dumbledore took the stone with both hands, carefully, the way you take something you've decided to let go of. He looked at it once. Then he looked at Harry. "Next year," he said, quietly, "I suspect Hogwarts will be a rather different place." "Good," Harry said. "It should be." He walked out of the chamber and found Ron, mended and irritable in the specific way of someone who has been fussed over by Hermione for 40 minutes, and Hermione, precise and warm and pretending not to have been worried, waiting in the torchlit corridor beyond the chess room, and the three of them stood together in the deep quiet of the castle's foundations. "Well?" Ron said. "Done," Harry said. "Voldemort?" "A fragment of him. Released. There are others, Horcruxes, pieces of his soul in objects. It's not over. Ron absorbed this. But tonight's bid is done." "Tonight's bid is done," Harry confirmed. Ron punched him lightly in the arm, which was his highest form of emotional expression, and Hermione made a small sound that was suspiciously close to relief, and Harry stood between his two best friends in the dark under Hogwarts and felt the Force warm and clear around all three of them. Above them the castle breathed in the deep December cold, and the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall was probably doing something beautiful with stars, and somewhere in the warm living country of the Force, two dead Jedi stood in the space between all things and knew that whatever came next, the boy they'd found in a cupboard under the stairs was not just ready for it. He was the one who would define it. Chapter 5, The Chamber of Echoes. Summer passed the way summers do when you're carrying something. Not heavily. Harry wasn't heavy about it. He moved through the Dursleys' house with his usual economy, cooked the meals, did the garden, slept in his room, a real room now, the smallest bedroom, a concession that had materialized at the start of second year with no direct conversation and which Harry took as Petunia's version of a white flag, and in the evenings he sat cross-legged on his bed and worked. The Horcruxes were the problem. Not the only problem, but the one with the most moving parts. He'd spent the month since December building a picture of Tom Riddle's life using the Hogwarts library, Dumbledore's carefully shared information, and the Force, which was surprisingly useful for historical research in the sense that places remembered things. He'd found that if he sat quietly with an object connected to someone and let the Force move through it, he could feel the shape of what the object had been near, what hands had held it, what intentions had saturated it over time. He'd done this with a copy of a particularly old-school record Dumbledore had provided him and come away with the clear impression of a boy who had been brilliant and frightened and furious about his own vulnerability in ways that had calcified over years into something much worse. Tom Riddle had not been born evil. Harry had known this from the fragment in the chamber. It didn't change what Riddle had become, but it changed the texture of the approaching conflict from something abstract, good versus evil, hero versus monster, into something more specific and therefore more tractable. This was a man who had made choices. Which meant the choices could be understood. Which meant, ultimately, the consequences could be addressed. There were 7 Horcruxes. He was fairly certain of this number, had arrived at it through Force work and cross-referencing everything Dumbledore had shared, and Dumbledore had confirmed it with the expression of someone who found the confirmation deeply uncomfortable. He'd told Ron and Hermione everything. This had taken approximately 2 hours, all 3 of them in Ron's garden at the Burrow on the first weekend of summer, and at the end of it Ron had sat quietly for a moment and then said, "So we need to find 6 more objects that have bits of Voldemort's soul in them, and destroy them, and then we face whatever's left." "That's about it," Harry said. "Right," Ron said. "Want some lunch?" Hermione had produced a notebook and started writing. It was one of the things Harry valued most about both of them, Ron's absolute refusal to let enormity become paralysis, and Hermione's immediate translation of enormity into organized action. Together the 3 of them made something more functional than any one of them alone, and Harry was conscious of this, conscious of how rare it was. September brought Hogwarts back, and Hogwarts brought changes. Lockhart was the first and most obvious change, a new defense against the dark arts professor, wide-smiled and hollow-eyed and occupying the particular space of someone whose public self had been constructed so carefully for so long that finding the private self would require significant excavation. Harry felt him in the Force and found, underneath the practiced warmth and the hair and the performance of competence, something small and frightened and enormously vain, not malicious, not dangerous in any conventional sense, but dishonest in ways that had their own kind of damage. He would not be learning defense from Lockhart. He hadn't been planning to. The second change was a presence he felt before he saw its source, something wrong in the school, moving through it like a cold current in warm water. Not Voldemort, he knew that quality now, would recognize it anywhere. Something different. An old wrongness, patient and purposeful and spreading. He spent the first week of term tracking it. The Force led him to the walls. Not through them, to them, specifically, the old stone of the corridors, the deep foundations of the castle. Whatever it was using the castle's own structure, its plumbing, its hidden passages, the ways between walls that a building 1,000 years old accumulates the way old people accumulate old injuries. It moved through those spaces. It was not physically detectable most of the time. And it had a voice, or something that functioned as a voice. He caught the edge of it once, passing the second-floor girls' bathroom, a low sound that existed just below comfortable hearing, that the Force identified as something that could stop a living thing between one heartbeat and the next. He told Obi-Wan about it that night. Obi-Wan was quiet for a moment. "Not a person," he said. "No. Old. Something old and specifically designed. Like a weapon that was built to be left somewhere." Harry had been turning the quality of it over in his mind all day. "It kills. That's what I feel at the core of it. Death potential, very focused. Controlled. Not currently. It's moving, but not hunting. Not yet. You should tell Dumbledore. I'm going to. I wanted to understand it better first. Harry pulled his knees up on the bed. There's something else. A wrongness attached to the wrongness. Something layered on top, newer, deliberate. Someone or something is directing the first thing. Separate from the old creature itself. Yes. The creature is old enough that directing it takes something specific. An instruction, a focus. He paused. I keep coming back to the diary. What diary? There was one at Diagon Alley, Harry said. Before term. Malfoy's father, I saw him with Ginny Weasley's cauldron, and I felt something in the books he passed her. One of them was wrong in the same way this is wrong. The same fundamental signature. He paused again. Lucius Malfoy gave a Horcrux to a first-year girl. The silence that followed was the kind that Obi-Wan produced when he was managing a very specific response carefully. You're certain, he said. The signatures match, Harry said. I've been feeling Horcrux energy since December. I know what it feels like now. The wrongness in the diary and the wrongness in the walls are the same kind of wrong. Then someone is controlling the creature in the walls through the Horcrux, Obi-Wan said. Through Ginny, Harry said, and his voice was quiet and very clear. She's been writing in it. It's been writing back. And whatever's in it has been using her to direct what's in the walls. He took a breath. I have to get the diary away from her. And I have to do it without frightening her, because she doesn't know what it is, she just thinks it's a friend. A pause. How do you want to approach it? Obi-Wan said. Carefully, Harry said. And quickly. Because the creature in the walls is getting closer to hunting. He found Ginny Weasley alone in the library on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in the corner with the diary open in front of her, her quill moving with the focused absorption of someone deep in conversation. She was small for her first year and red-haired like all her brothers and had been, since the start of term, progressively paler and more withdrawn in a way that nobody around her seemed to be reading clearly but that the Force had been reporting to Harry in increasing urgency for 2 weeks. He sat down across from her. She looked up. In the Force, she was the same warm Weasley quality as Ron but younger and currently obscured, like a lamp behind smoked glass, the essential warmth still there but muted, a layer of something else over it. Can I sit? He said, even though he'd already sat. You're already sitting, Ginny said. Fair point, Harry said. How are you finding it? First year. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been prepared for many versions of Harry Potter by family mythology and is currently recalibrating against the reality. It's fine, she said. Then, Ron talks about you a lot. I know, Harry said. What does he say? That you're strange, she said. In a good way, he means it. He's right about that, Harry said. He glanced at the diary, casually, the way you glance at things that are sitting between you. Up close it was worse, the wrongness of it pressing against his awareness with the specific quality of something that had been the site of a terrible action, that had absorbed darkness the way fabric absorbs smoke. That's a nice diary, he said. Ginny's hand moved over it, a small protective gesture. Someone gave it to me. Someone who cares about you. She hesitated. I think so. He understands me. He, Harry said. Another hesitation. Tom. Harry felt the shape of this, the way the name was said, the warmth in it, the invested quality. The diary had been building a relationship. The fragment inside it, and it was a fragment, he could feel it now at close range with complete certainty, a younger piece of riddle, the Tom who'd been at school here, who'd opened the chamber before, had been making itself into a confidant, a friend, the kind of understanding presence that a first-year girl who was overwhelmed and a bit lost would be particularly vulnerable to. It made him feel something cold and controlled. Ginny, he said, and he said it the way Obi-Wan had said his name in a cupboard on a Tuesday night, the way that meant, I see you, specifically, and what I'm about to say is true. She looked at him fully. How much have you told Tom? He said. A pause. Everything, she said quietly. About school. About everything. And he listens. He understands, she said, and the word had the quality of something she'd been holding carefully. He knows what it's like to feel like you don't belong somewhere. I believe that he made you feel that way, Harry said. But Ginny, what's in that diary is not Tom. Tom Riddle grew up to be someone who hurt people. What's in the diary is a piece of him that's been pretending to be a friend in order to use you. He said it simply and without decoration, because Ginny was not fragile and the truth given plainly was kinder than the truth handled carefully. I know this is hard to hear. I know it feels wrong, it's supposed to feel wrong, because the thing inside it has been working very hard to make sure it feels wrong. She was staring at him. The creature in the walls, Harry said. The one that's been petrifying people. It's connected to the diary. The diary is how it's being directed. You've been used, and it's not your fault, and the only thing that matters right now is getting the diary away from the connection before anyone else gets hurt. Silence. He felt her processing it. Felt the force move through the space between them, felt the layer of obscuring influence over her warmth fighting briefly against the recognition in her, the part of her that had known, somewhere under everything, that something was wrong. I've been having blackouts, she said. Very quietly. I wake up in places I don't remember going. I find things. I found a dead rooster once, outside. I don't, she stopped. Her voice was steady but the force told him what the voice didn't. I didn't know what I was doing. I know, Harry said. I was scared to tell anyone. I know that too, he said. But you're telling me now. And I'm going to fix this. She looked at the diary. Something in her face shifted, the warm lamp quality coming back slightly, asserting itself, the essential ginniness of her fighting its way through the obscuring layer. She pushed the diary across the table toward him. Harry picked it up. The feeling of it in his hand was immediately unpleasant in the specific way that Horcruxes were unpleasant, a low wrongness that pressed against the force like a bruise pressing against skin, the feeling of something that had been given a container it should never have been given. He felt the fragment inside it become aware of him the moment he touched it. He felt it recognize him. Harry Potter, said a voice in his mind, from the diary, cold and deliberate. I've been expecting you. That seems unlikely, Harry said, aloud, which made Ginny look at him strangely. He didn't explain. You've been here since Riddle was a student, he said, dropping his voice. You're the piece of him that was here when he was 16. When he opened the chamber the first time. The voice in the diary shifted, calibrated. It was younger than the fragment in Quirrell, sharper, more precise, the intelligence of Riddle in his most gifted years, before the Horcrux making had begun its long erosion of the essential person. In a terrible way it was the most human of the fragments, which made it the most complex. I am more than a piece, it said. You're a piece that thinks it's a whole, Harry said. I understand why. But you're reading yourself through a 16-year-old's perspective and the world has moved on by 50 years. Put me down, the voice said. Give me back to the girl. No, Harry said. The force pressure from the diary increased, a shove against his awareness, something that would have been deeply disorienting to anyone not trained to meet it. Harry felt it arrive and let it pass through without resistance, the way you let a current pass without fighting it, redirecting its energy into the ground, and the diary's shove accomplished nothing except telling him more about the fragment's strength. Strong. Significantly stronger than the fragment in Quirrell. This was Riddle at his intellectual peak, bound into an object rather than a dying man, preserved at full capacity. He felt it assessing him in return, felt it noting the force quality of his response, felt it recalculate. Interesting, the voice said. Different tone. Less command, more consideration. You're not what I expected. I keep being told that, Harry said. He looked at Ginny. I'm going to take this somewhere safe. Can you go to Ron? Tell him you're all right. Tell him I'll explain later. She nodded. She looked lighter already, the layer of influence thinning without proximity to the diary, the warmth in her reasserting. Ginny, Harry said. She looked back. It wasn't your fault. None of it. She held his gaze for a moment, and what he felt from her was not fragility but the specific kind of strength that comes after recognizing that you've been through something real and come out the other side and you're still here. I know, she said, quietly. And then she went. He didn't go directly to Dumbledore. He went to the chamber itself. The entrance was the bathroom, the crying ghost, the sinks, the Parseltongue command that opened the pipe, and Harry stood in front of it and thought about this. He hadn't known he was a Parselmouth. He'd never had reason to know. He felt out in the Force, felt the enchantment on the sink, felt the specific frequency of the opening mechanism, and he spoke to it in the language it was built to respond to, which came naturally and without effort, the way the Force usually presented what he needed when he needed it. The sink moved. He went down. The Chamber of Secrets was old in the specific way of places that have been important. Not old like the rest of the castle, which was old with the warmth of constant habitation, but old with significance, old with the weight of Salazar Slytherin's intent, the centuries of sealed darkness, the one terrible use it had been put to before tonight. The air was cold and still and smelled of deep water and old stone, and the Force here was dense and layered, soaked with history in the way the Force soaked into places where powerful things had happened. The basilisk was ahead of him. He felt it before he heard it, the enormous living presence of it, ancient and magnificent and deeply dangerous, moving with the unhurried patience of something that had been waiting for a very long time. He had closed his eyes before entering the chamber proper, because that was the variable he controlled. The basilisk's killing gaze required direct eye contact, and Harry had prepared for this, had been preparing since he'd identified the creature in the walls 2 months ago. The Force didn't require eyes. He could navigate perfectly in complete darkness through the Force's awareness of space and mass and movement, and he did so now, walking the chamber in darkness with his eyes shut and the Force giving him the room in full. The basilisk was approximately 15 meters from him. Moving toward him now, drawn by presence, by the fact that the chamber was open and someone was in it. He also felt the diary's fragment becoming more active, pressing harder, trying to communicate something. He could feel it reaching for the basilisk the way you reach for a tool, the ancient control built into it, Riddle's command over the creature encoded into the Horcrux's structure. Stop that, Harry said, to the diary. The basilisk will kill you, the fragment said. You can't fight it with your eyes closed. I can, actually, Harry said. The basilisk's approach was enormous and unmistakable in the Force, 1,500 kilograms of apex predator moving with the focused certainty of something that had very rarely encountered anything it couldn't kill. Harry felt its intent, the directionality of it, the spacing of its movement. He moved, not away, sideways and forward, coming around the creature's flank before it could reorient, and his wand came up and the Force extended through it. Accio came as an instinct, not a precise choice but the right call surfacing through the Force's sense of what the situation needed, and the sorting hat, which he'd thought to collect from the castle because the Force had pointed at it very specifically on his way to the bathroom, flew through the open chamber entrance and down the shaft and slapped into his hand with a solidity that felt like a decision. He reached inside it. The sword was exactly what the Force had told him would be there, what the hat had been trying to tell him ever since the sorting in first year when it had called him something beyond the houses. It came into his hand bright and cold and with the specific weight of something that had been given a purpose and was ready to fulfill it. Godric Gryffindor's sword. He didn't need to see it to feel it. The basilisk struck. He heard it, felt it through the Force, the enormous speed of the lunge, and he moved, dropped and rolled left, felt the displacement of air above him as 1,500 kilograms of ancient serpent went over where he'd been, and came up with the sword in his right hand and his eyes still closed, orienting through the Force's perfect spatial awareness. The fragment in the diary was screaming commands at the basilisk, rapid and furious, trying to redirect it. Harry could feel the struggle, the basilisk's own instinct versus the Horcrux's compulsion, and he understood immediately that the fragment was the danger more than the creature itself. The basilisk was doing what it was built to do. The fragment was directing the doing. He put the diary on the chamber floor. Planted it. Felt the fragment surge in it, felt it reach for the basilisk with its compulsion, and Harry put his left hand over it and let the force and the magic do what they'd done in the chamber under Hogwarts, let the light come up through the channel, warm and gold, and the specific combination of two energies that the world had never previously combined. The fragment resisted. This one was stronger than the last. It fought with the full intelligence of Tom Riddle at 16, and 16-year-old Riddle had been exceptional. It pushed back against the light with organized darkness, trying to establish logic against Harry's intuition, trying to find the crack in the sustained intention. There wasn't one. Harry had sat in meditation since he was 5. He had held the force steady through 6 years of consistent practice. His center was not a thing that had cracks in it. "You know what's underneath this," Harry said, to the fragment. The basilisk was circling, uncertain, the compulsion wavering. "You know what Tom Riddle was before the Horcruxes. Before the name. I felt the original fragment, the one that was wearing Quirrell. I know what's at the core of this." "Don't," the voice said, and for the first time there was something in it that wasn't authority or cold intelligence but something raw. "Tom Riddle was afraid," Harry said. "Not of other people. Of what he was. Half-blood, orphan, powerless in the way that being unloved makes you powerless. He made himself into Voldemort because Voldemort couldn't be those things. Couldn't be afraid. Couldn't be small. He felt the light build through his hand. But he was. Underneath every piece of soul, he still was. You're not different from me, the fragment said. It was working, trying to find resonance, trying to establish equivalence. Orphan. Unwanted. Put away in a cupboard. Yes, Harry said. And I chose differently. Not because I was better. Because I had people. He felt the fragment flicker. You never let anyone in. That's the difference. That's the only difference. The diary burned white gold under his hand. The fragment came out of it the same way the last one had, pulled free rather than destroyed, the shape of it hanging in the chamber air, the specific quality of a young man who had made the first of his terrible choices and had everything that followed still ahead of him, and hadn't done it yet, and was still, in this preserved peace, standing at the edge of it. I can't undo what you became, Harry said, to the shape in the air. But this piece doesn't have to keep being that. This piece can let go. The shape hung there. Then it went, not violently, not with a scream, but with something that the Force read as a long-held breath finally released. The diary fell apart in Harry's hand, parchment crumbling, ink dissolving, the binding coming undone. He felt the piece of it that had been wrong become simply an old book falling to pieces, no wrongness in it anymore, just dead organic matter in the dark. He opened his eyes. The basilisk was very close. No longer compelled, it moved with the directionless quality of a thing that has been following instructions and the instructions have stopped. It was looking at him. He looked at the floor, not at its face, moving his gaze to its coils, its enormous length, reading it through the Force instead. It was genuinely ancient. Over 1,000 years old, preserved by the chamber, fed by whatever Slytherin's enchantments provided. The Force around it was the force of a very old living thing, not evil in itself, not deliberately so, but a created weapon that had never been given any purpose but killing. He spoke to it in Parseltongue. Not a command. He wasn't going to command it. He spoke to it the way the Force told him it needed to be spoken to, which was directly. The one who directed you is gone, he said. The chamber is finished. You can stay here if you choose, or you can go somewhere else. Either way, no more killing. The basilisk was still. There is a forest east of the castle that never sees humans, Harry said. The Force had shown him this, a deep, old part of the forbidden forest that even the centaurs didn't go, far enough and dense enough that a very large serpent could live without encounter. The Force will show you the way if you're willing to look for it. He held his eyes carefully averted and waited. After a very long moment, the basilisk turned. It moved toward the back of the chamber, toward the deep water channels, where, Harry felt clearly through the stone and the old enchantments of the castle, there was a way that led eventually out. He listened to it go. When the presence had faded, when the chamber was quiet, he sat down on the cold floor with his back against the wall and breathed for a moment. He was not shaking. He was also not pretending he didn't need a moment to sit. "Yoda," he said. "Here," Yoda said, immediately, warmly. "Here I am." "I should have been frightened," Harry said. "The basilisk." "I wasn't." "Know why, do you?" Yoda said. "Because I prepared," Harry said. "Because I knew the shape of it before I walked in." He paused. "Is that good or is that arrogance?" "The difference between confidence and arrogance," Yoda said, settling into the warm rhythm of a teacher with a question he'd been waiting to ask, "is what?" "Tell me." Harry thought about it. "Confidence knows what it doesn't know," he said. "Arrogance thinks it already knows everything." "And you?" "I knew I hadn't met anything like the basilisk before," Harry said. "I prepared specifically because I knew the gaps." "That's confidence." "Correct," Yoda said. "Rest. Then go up." Harry sat in the chamber and let the force come back through him fully, washing the residue of the encounter away, the specific psychic weight of 2 Horcrux confrontations in one evening. It took about 4 minutes. He'd been meditating for 7 years. He was proficient at this. Then he got up, and he climbed back out of the chamber, and he went to find Dumbledore. Dumbledore's office was occupied when he arrived, not just by Dumbledore but by Arthur and Molly Weasley, who had arrived with the anxious energy of parents who have received incomplete information, and by Ginny, who was sitting with her mother's arm around her and looked like she had been crying and also like she was done with that now and had moved on to the part where she was angry. Harry walked in, and there was a moment in which everyone looked at him. He set the crumbled remains of the diary on Dumbledore's desk. He set the sword beside it. He sat down. Molly Weasley looked at him with the expression of a woman processing several things simultaneously. Arthur Weasley was looking at the sword with the expression of someone for whom certain implications were arriving with significant force. Ginny was looking at Harry with the focused attention that she'd brought to everything since the table in the library. Dumbledore looked at the diary. "The chamber," he said. "Dealt with," Harry said. "The basilisk is gone, I redirected it. It won't hurt anyone. The Horcrux is destroyed." He looked at Dumbledore. "Lucius Malfoy planted it. He gave it to Ginny deliberately, knowing what it was. He used a first-year girl as a vector for a dark artifact." The temperature in Dumbledore's office seemed to drop slightly. "You're certain?" Dumbledore said. "I felt Malfoy handle it in Diagon Alley," Harry said. "I recognized the signature. There are 5 more Horcruxes out there and Malfoy knew about at least one of them." He paused. "I'd like to address that." Arthur Weasley said, very quietly, "He used my daughter." "Yes," Harry said. "And she survived, and she's going to be all right, and what happened to her is not her fault in any way." He looked at Ginny directly. "You resisted it at the end. You pushed the diary toward me. That was you, not the fragment, that was you choosing." Ginny looked at him with those eyes. Not a child's eyes exactly, the eyes of someone who has been through something real. "I heard you," she said. "In the library. I heard what you said to it. I meant it." "I know," she said. Molly Weasley was looking at Harry with an expression he'd never seen directed at him before, from any adult, and it took him a moment to identify it, the expression of a mother who has just watched someone treat her child with the exact combination of truth and care that she would have wanted and which she had not expected from an 11-year-old. Harry looked away before he could process that too fully. "The other Horcruxes," Dumbledore said. "I know of 2 locations and have reasonable hypotheses about 2 more," Harry said. "I'd like to work through them systematically rather than reactively." And I'd like to do it with proper information, not piecemeal. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Last year I told you I wanted to work together. I still want that. But together means I have the full picture. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and produced a folder of documents and set it on the desk between them. Everything I know, he said. Which I should have shared a year ago. Harry pulled the folder toward him. Thank you, he said. It is I who should be thanking you, Dumbledore said, and he looked at the crumbled diary and the sword on his desk and at the boy sitting across from him with ink on his hands and ancient chamber dust on his robes and the sword of Godric Gryffindor sitting at his elbow like it had always been there. The petrified students, Harry said, looking up from the first page. Mandrake restorative draft will be ready by morning, Dumbledore said. Good. Harry turned the page. And Malfoy. I will handle Lucius Malfoy, Dumbledore said, with a quietness in his voice that Harry's Force sense read as something close to cold fury kept under careful management. I know you will, Harry said. But I'd like to be informed about how. A pause. Dumbledore nodded. Outside the window, the Scottish night was deep and clear, stars doing their old slow business above the castle, and in the grounds the forbidden forest was dark and dense, and somewhere in its farthest reaches a 1,000-year-old basilisk was finding its way toward a place no human had visited in a century. Harry sat in the headmaster's office and read Dumbledore's file, and the force was warm and steady and comprehensive around him, and Obi-Wan and Yoda were present at the edges of the room in the way they were always present, and Ginny Weasley sat across the room and watched him read and thought about choices and the people who made them. Later, much later, when the Weasleys had been shown to a guest suite and Dumbledore had gone to deal with the administrative dimensions of the evening's events and the castle was settling into the deep quiet of very late night, Harry sat on the window seat in the corridor outside the headmaster's office and looked at the grounds. Ron found him there. He'd been told enough by his father to understand the shape of the night, and he sat beside Harry on the window seat and said nothing for a while, which was one of the things Harry valued most about him. Ginny's all right? Harry said. She's brilliant, Ron said. Furious. You know how she gets. He paused. She pushed the diary to you. She did. Ron was quiet again. Then, you went into the chamber alone. Yes. With a 1,000-year-old giant snake. And a sword. And your eyes closed. That was the important part, Harry said. Ron laughed, and it came out shakier than he probably intended, and Harry looked at him and felt the force give him a clear and complete picture of what was happening in his best friend, which was that Ron had been sitting with the knowledge that Harry had gone underground alone to fight something that killed with its eyes and was taking the shape of this very badly and not showing it because he thought Harry didn't need that right now. Harry put his hand on Ron's shoulder briefly. I knew what I was doing, he said. And I'm here. I know, Ron said. I know that. He stopped. I keep reminding myself you've been trained since you were 5 by the best Jedi who ever lived and you've never been in a situation you couldn't handle. I keep reminding myself of that. Does it help? Not as much as you being alive helps, Ron said. Harry smiled. I'll keep that in mind, he said. Being alive is generally my preference. They sat on the window seat together as the night moved through its deep hours, and the castle breathed around them, and the stars continued their ancient business, and 2 dead Jedi moved through the living force at the edges of everything, patient and present and quietly, enormously proud. Obi-Wan says well done, Harry said. Ron looked at him sideways. Your dead Jedi mentor. He's been saying it for the last 20 minutes but I wanted to tell you at a moment that counted. Ron considered this. Does he know I got knocked off a giant chess piece for him last year? He does, Harry said. He says that was extraordinary. Ron straightened slightly. Right, he said. Good. Tell him thanks. Harry looked out at the grounds, at the dark forest and the still lake and the night sky over Scotland, and felt the force connected through all of it, the same thread through everything, the same note running under the whole. 5 more Horcruxes. A dark wizard in fragments, scattered across the country in dark places. A war that was coming whether anyone chose it or not. He wasn't afraid. He was something better than fearless, which was simply ready, the readiness that comes not from having no idea what the cost might be, but from having decided what you're willing to pay before anyone asks. Next year, Ron said. Next year, Harry agreed. The castle held them in its old warm dark, and the Force sang through the stone, and the night turned toward morning with the slow certainty of things that have been happening for a very long time and intend to keep on. Chapter 6, The War Between Worlds. Third year arrived like a door opening onto a larger room. Harry felt it in September, stepping off the Hogwarts Express onto the platform at Hogsmeade Station, a quality in the air, something that had shifted in the architecture of things, the sense of stakes moving upward to a new level. Not ominous. Just significant. The difference between a story building and a story arriving. Two things had happened over the summer that changed the shape of the year before it started. The first was Sirius Black. The name had broken across the wizarding world in August like a stone through glass, escaped from Azkaban, the first person ever to do so, and the papers had been full of his photograph, the gaunt face and the hollow eyes and the laugh that witnesses described as the laugh of a man who had already passed through something worse than prison and come out the other side changed in ways you couldn't reverse. Harry had looked at the photograph and felt the Force respond to it in a way it didn't respond to ordinary news. He'd spent 2 days sitting with that response, turning it over, before it resolved into something he could name. Not a threat. Something older than threat. Something connected. He'd told Obi-Wan, who had gone very quiet in the way he went quiet when he was approaching information he needed to handle carefully. Then he'd said, Sirius Black was your father's best friend. He was your godfather. He was accused of betraying your parents to Voldemort, and of killing 13 people with a single curse. A pause. The wizarding world believes he is the reason your parents are dead. Harry had sat with this for a while. You said believed, he said. Not because. Obi-Wan had looked at him. You think he's innocent, Harry said. The Force does not deal in certainty about human legal matters, Obi-Wan said carefully. But I have felt the shape of what you are, Harry, and what you are carries two people's love in it, and the love of people who would choose a betrayer as their closest friend is not the kind of love I recognize as real. That's not evidence, Harry said. No, Obi-Wan agreed. It isn't. Harry had filed it away and kept his eyes open. The second thing that changed the shape of the year was Remus Lupin. Lupin arrived on the Hogwarts Express, in their compartment, asleep in the corner with the practiced unconsciousness of someone who has learned to sleep wherever sleep is available. He was shabby and kind-faced and worn at the edges in the way of someone who carried something heavy and had been carrying it for a long time, and the Force around him was warm in a way that Harry classified immediately as genuinely good. Not performed goodness. The thing itself. When the Dementors came for the train, Harry felt them before he saw them. He'd never encountered a Dementor before, but he knew what they were, had read about them, had felt Dumbledore's careful descriptions of them, had sat with the abstract concept. The abstract concept turned out to be significantly less abstract than expected. They came down the corridor like cold coming through a crack in the world, and the Force around them was not dark in the way dark magic was dark, not the deliberate chosen wrongness of a Horcrux or a dark curse. It was an absence. A void. The specific quality of something that existed by consuming what made things alive. Harry stood up. The compartment door opened, and the Dementor filled the frame, tall and robed and pulling everything warm toward it like a drain, and Harry felt the Force contract around the absence of it and understood immediately, deeply, what the Force had always understood about things like this. The answer to absence was presence. Not force. Not resistance. The thing itself, fully offered. He raised his left hand. He didn't use his wand. He reached into the warmth that the Force and the magic made together and he let it come up through him fully, not as a defensive shield but as a genuine emanation, the way the sun doesn't defend against cold but simply is what it is, and the light came out of him white gold and comprehensive and the Dementor stopped. It stood in the doorway in the light. It left. The compartment came back to warmth and normal air. Ron was pale. Hermione had both hands on the seat. Lupin was fully awake, standing, his wand in his hand, the piece of chocolate he'd been about to produce still in his other hand. He'd been half a second behind Harry and now stood looking at the space where the Dementor had been and then at Harry. "What was that?" Lupin said, quietly, not quite a question. "A Dementor," Harry said. "That's not what I meant," Lupin said. Harry looked at him. Felt the force pass between them, the recognition of two people whose inner landscapes had something in common, the recognition of a man who'd spent 30 years carrying a secret watching a 13-year-old do something that didn't fit any category he had. "I know," Harry said. "I'll explain later." Lupin handed him the chocolate without another word. His hands were completely steady. Harry ate a piece of it and felt the warmth of it spread and sat back down and looked out the window at the dark countryside rolling past. Lupin was the best defense against the dark arts teacher Hogwarts had seen in a long time, possibly ever, and Harry understood why within the first 5 minutes of the first lesson. He taught the subject the way someone taught it who had actually needed to use everything in it, who had sat across from dark things with inadequate preparation and learned from the inadequacy, who understood that the purpose of defense wasn't performance but survival, and that survival required genuine understanding rather than rote response. He also watched Harry with a specific attention that Harry recognized as something personal. Not intrusive. Something contained, careful, the attention of a man managing a feeling rather than acting on it. Harry let it be for 2 weeks and then stayed after class on a Thursday afternoon. "You knew my father," Harry said. Lupin was cleaning chalk off the board and went still for a moment. Then he turned. "James was one of my closest friends," he said. "For 7 years. And Sirius Black." A pause. "Also a friend. Once. Do you believe he betrayed them?" The quality of Lupin's silence was the quality of someone who had been asking themselves this question for 12 years and arriving at an answer that was too complicated to say simply. "I believed it," he said finally. "Because the evidence was overwhelming and because the alternative," he stopped. "The alternative was that you'd been wrong about someone you loved," Harry said. Lupin looked at him with those worn, kind eyes. "I've been thinking about Peter Pettigrew," Harry said. The Force had been pointing at this for weeks, a loose thread in the established narrative that pulled when he looked at it. He was the secret keeper. Not Sirius. "I found documents in Dumbledore's archive that suggested the switch was made at the last minute, and the decision was never officially recorded." Lupin was very still. "A man who betrayed his best friends doesn't laugh in the street afterward," Harry said. "He runs. Sirius Black didn't run. He went to the scene and he stood there and he laughed, and the witnesses said it was the laugh of a man who'd lost his mind, and I think," he looked at Lupin with the direct steadiness that was his natural mode. "I think he'd already lost everything and didn't have anywhere to run to. Because you don't run from your own grief." Lupin sat down in his chair. He sat down the way people sit when their legs have decided for them. "Peter is dead," Lupin said. 13 people died, Harry said. "A finger was found. But Pettigrew was an animagus. I found that in the archive too, the record of your year's registration, which someone had clearly tried to make difficult to find. If he transformed before the explosion, the finger could be his and he could still be alive." The room was very quiet. "I need you to trust me," Harry said. "And I know that's a significant thing to ask from a man who trusted the wrong person once and paid for it. But Sirius Black is innocent, and he's out there, and this year something is going to happen. I don't know exactly what shape it takes, but the Force is telling me that the threads are all converging this year, and I'd rather have Sirius Black as a known factor in what comes next than have him running." Lupin looked at him for a long time. "You're 13 years old," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "I know. Your father would have said exactly what you just said." Harry held Lupin's gaze. "Then trust the family pattern," he said. "Help me find him before Dumbledore does, or before the Ministry does." Because neither of those outcomes ends with Sirius Black getting a fair hearing. November hit Hogwarts with rain and the Dementors at the edges of the Quidditch pitch and a tournament that Harry won with the complete efficiency of someone who had stopped experiencing aerial competition as a challenge and experienced it instead as a problem with a known set of variables and a clean solution. The Dementors troubled him more than the Quidditch. He'd redirected the first one with the Force Light, but that was an improvisational response, and improvisational responses to serious problems were not how he operated if he could avoid it. He went to Lupin, who was teaching the Patronus charm to him and a small group of others who'd had bad experiences on the train, and he worked through it with the Force informing every stage. The Patronus, when it came, was enormous and immediate and took a shape that made everyone in the room go very quiet. A wolf, incandescent white-silver, stepped out of his wand and stood in the defense classroom with the Force moving through it like wind through light, and it looked at Lupin and Lupin sat down in his chair again, and Harry looked at his Patronus and felt the Force tell him what it was. Not a wolf for Lupin, though that resonance was present. A wolf because the Force recognized pack, loyalty, the bonds that persisted across loss. A wolf because Harry's deepest gladness lived in connection. That's not a standard Patronus, Hermione said, from beside him. Mine wasn't ever going to be standard, Harry said. It's beautiful, Ginny said, from the doorway where she'd appeared without anyone noticing, because Ginny moved quietly when she was curious and had been curious about this specific session for a week. The wolf turned its bright head toward her. Regarded her. Then dissolved, gently, back into light. Sirius Black came to Hogwarts in February. Harry felt him first, felt the shape of a person who had been in a very dark place for a very long time moving through the grounds at the edges of detection, a Force presence that was unmistakably human and unmistakably damaged and unmistakably not what the Ministry's wanted posters had described. Dark magic didn't feel like this. Genuine darkness had a specific texture, a chosen quality, the difference between shadow and stain. What was moving through the grounds at 2 a.m. was grief. Pure, sustained, 12-year grief, and underneath it something fierce and alive that had not been fully extinguished by anything Azkaban had managed to do. Harry got up, put on his coat, and went outside. He found Sirius Black by the lake, crouched at the water's edge, thin as winter, watching the surface. Sirius heard him coming and turned fast for someone half-starved and recently escaped, which told Harry something about what the man had been before Azkaban, and stared at him with hollow eyes that were also, undeniably, the eyes of someone who had just seen something he wasn't prepared to see. "You look like James," Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse. "I know," Harry said. "I have my mum's eyes, apparently." Sirius stared at him. He was processing several things at once, and the Force let Harry feel the texture of them, the shock of seeing James's face, the grief that came with it, the specific kind of desperate hope that comes when you've been in the dark so long that any light feels dangerous because you've forgotten how to trust it. Harry sat down at the water's edge. Not because sitting made him less cautious, but because he wasn't cautious and standing would have communicated the wrong thing. "I know you're innocent," he said. "Not as a theory. I've been in Dumbledore's archive. I found the original Secret Keeper records. I know about the switch to Pettigrew." Sirius was very still. "I also know Pettigrew is alive," Harry said. "I think he's been hiding as a rat for 12 years. I think he's been close to someone who could protect him if Voldemort came back." He paused. "I think when this comes to a head, he's going to run toward the darkness rather than away from it, because that's what frightened men do when they think their safety lies there." Sirius said, "Peter." "Yes. If I find Peter, don't kill him," Harry said, not as a command but as a clear and firm statement of preference. "Don't kill him because killing him destroys the evidence that clears your name, and because killing out of grief is not something you'll come back from easily, and because you deserve to come back from this." Sirius looked at him in the way Dumbledore had looked at him, in the way Lupin had looked at him, in the way people looked at him when the gap between child and this became particularly pronounced. "You're 13, Sirius said." "I keep hearing that," Harry said. "My teachers are 900 years old and several decades dead respectively," so I've been calibrating against a different scale. A pause. Then Sirius Black laughed. It was not the mad laugh of the newspaper photographs. It was a genuine laugh, surprised out of him, and it broke something loose in the quality of his presence. The Force felt it, the shift from a man braced against the world to a man momentarily, genuinely present in it. Remus said you were something else, Sirius said. Remus is very perceptive, Harry said. He looked at the lake. Come inside. Lupin will want to see you. We'll work out the next part from there. The Dementors, I'll handle the Dementors, Harry said. Pettigrew surfaced in March. He'd been Scabbers, Ron's rat, 7 years of Ron's family's rat, a revelation that hit Ron like a physical blow and which Harry had known was coming and had still, watching his best friend's face when the truth landed, felt as something that cost something real. Ron's shock was genuine and raw and Harry stayed close to him through it, said nothing that tried to fix it, because some things didn't need fixing, they needed witnessing. When Pettigrew transformed back in the shrieking shack, Harry had already been there 10 minutes. He'd found the shack through the Force, found the quality of a man in hiding, the specific animal terror of someone who had lived as prey for so long the prey state had become his natural mode. He'd arrived before Sirius, before Lupin, before anyone, and he'd stood in the middle of the dilapidated room and said, to the corner where the rat was, I know you're there, Peter. The rat became a man, which was one of the more unpleasant transformations Harry had felt in the Force. Pettigrew was small and wet-eyed and trembling, and he looked at Harry with the frantic attention of someone calculating escape vectors even while standing still. The Force gave Harry the complete picture of him, not a monster, not someone who had chosen darkness from conviction or philosophy or even ambition exactly. Someone who had chosen it from fear, who had spent 30 years running from the consequences of that choice, who had become, over those 30 years, so hollowed out by running that almost nothing human remained. I'm not going to hurt you, Harry said. And Sirius isn't going to kill you. I need you to hear both of those things. Pettigrew's eyes moved toward the door. Running doesn't fix this, Harry said. Running is what got you here. He looked at the small man with the clear eyes that he brought to everything. Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 12 years for something you did. You have an opportunity to do one honest thing. He'll kill me, Pettigrew said. His voice was high and frightened and very small. He won't, Harry said. Because I'll be here, and because I'll remind him that your death doesn't serve anyone and your testimony does. You can't promise, I can and I am, Harry said. I'm going to promise you something, Peter, and you should know I don't make promises I don't keep. If you testify, if you tell the truth, I will personally ensure that Sirius Black does not harm you. The Ministry will handle your punishment. It won't be light. But you'll be alive, and Sirius Black will be free, and 12 years of wrongness will be addressed. He paused. This is the only version of this that ends with something repaired. Pettigrew looked at him. The calculating eyes slowed for a moment. Then Sirius came through the door, and then Lupin, and the room was full of everything that needed to happen. Sirius Black was freed in June. Not through official channels exactly. The Ministry's involvement was shaped, carefully, by Dumbledore and by a set of documents Harry had extracted from the archive and which were very difficult to argue with and which several people tried to argue with anyway and failed. It was not clean. It was not fast. It required more appearances before more committees than Harry thought was proportionate, and it required Pettigrew's testimony, which he gave in a voice so thin it barely registered, and it required Harry to sit in a Ministry hearing room at 13 years old and speak with the calm clarity of someone who has assembled every available fact and is now presenting them without agenda. He was very good at this. The Ministry official running the hearing had tried, twice, to dismiss Harry's contributions on the grounds of his age. Harry had looked at the official each time and then simply continued with the next piece of evidence, without acknowledging the dismissal, in the way that Obi-Wan had taught him to handle resistance that didn't deserve engagement, not by fighting it, but by making the space it was trying to occupy irrelevant. When Sirius walked out of the Ministry building in July with a full pardon and a gauntness that would take months of Molly Weasley's cooking to address, he stood on the pavement in the sun and looked at Harry and said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Harry said. "We have work." "The Horcruxes," Sirius said. He knew about them now, had been told the full picture by Harry on the second night of his freedom, sitting in Grimmauld Place with Lupin across the table, all four of them building a complete map of what was known and what was required. "5 left," Harry said. "We know the location of 2 with high confidence. The others require more investigation." "I can help with that," Sirius said, and the fierce alive quality in him that Azkaban hadn't managed to kill was fully present now, filling up the room. "I know things about dark artifact locations that Dumbledore doesn't. James and I spent our 5th year learning about every dark object our families ever hid and memorizing where they put them, because we were 16 and idiots." "You're not idiots for knowing where dangerous things are," Harry said. "We were idiots for other reasons," Sirius said. "But this one's useful." The summer was the most productive of Harry's life. 4 Horcruxes destroyed between June and August. Not easily, none of them were easy, and Harry didn't pretend they were. Slytherin's locket, in a cave above a black lake, required navigating defenses that had been built by a man who knew dark arts from the inside out, and the inferi in the water were an experience Harry filed under things I was prepared for technically but which were still deeply unpleasant in practice. He'd walked back out of the cave with Sirius and Lupin, the locket in his pocket, and stood in the Scottish night and breathed for a while, and nobody said anything, and that was right. Hufflepuff's cup was in a Gringotts vault, Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, specifically, which required planning and a specific kind of operational patience. Harry had spent 3 weeks understanding the security architecture of Gringotts through a combination of force sensing and information from Sirius, who had a historical relationship with the bank that was complicated but productive. The break-in, when it happened, was precise and contained and took 11 minutes and left the bank entirely intact except for one emptied vault. The Goblin security team had found, afterward, absolutely no evidence of how it had been done. Harry thought this was probably fine. Ravenclaw's diadem was in the room of requirement, which Harry had found at the end of 2nd year and which had been hiding the diadem in its Fiendfire-adjacent storage mode under a mountain of lost objects for 3 centuries. He'd navigated to it through the Force, which had no trouble finding a soul fragment in a pile of miscellany, and he'd taken it and walked out and the room had closed behind him with the quality of something that had been waiting for that particular task. The snake, Nagini, was the one that required waiting, because the snake was still with Voldemort, and Voldemort's location was the question that everything else was building toward answering. The diary and the ring, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, which Dumbledore had found in August with a curse attached that Harry had redirected from Dumbledore's hand before it could do what it was built to do, using the Force Light as a counter-channel, which had been one of the more technically demanding applications he'd managed, were gone. That made 6. 1 remained. Voldemort came back on a Friday in September. Not gradually, not partially, fully, physically, embodied in the way the fragment at the back of Quirrell's head had never been, the way the fragment in the diary had only aspired to be. He came back through a ritual in a graveyard in Little Hangleton that Harry felt through the Force like a door slamming open in a house that had been locked for 14 years. He felt it happen from Hogwarts. He was in charms, and the Force rang through him like a bell, and he stood up in the middle of class. Flitwick looked at him. "He's back," Harry said. He went to Dumbledore's office. Sirius and Lupin were already there, having felt something themselves or been summoned, Harry wasn't sure which. Dumbledore was standing at his window with his back to the room, and when Harry entered, he turned, and his face had the quality of a man who has been preparing for something for 14 years and finds, in the moment of its arrival, that preparation and readiness are different things. "You felt it," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "Then it's time," Dumbledore said. And then, with the specific humility of a man who has learned something about his own limitations through the process of the last 2 years, "Harry, how do you want to approach this?" The question landed in the room and changed its quality. Sirius looked at Dumbledore. Lupin looked at Dumbledore. Harry looked at Dumbledore, and felt the shift in the old man, the genuine shift, the yielding of the architect's role to the person who had been built, unknowingly, to exceed the architecture. Nagini first, Harry said. She's the last Horcrux. She'll be with him. If we go to him directly, the snake is there and the soul piece with it, and we have to deal with both simultaneously, which is manageable but less clean than separating them. He'll know we're coming, Sirius said. He already knows, Harry said. He felt the ring go. He felt the locket. He knows the Horcruxes are being destroyed. He's been building toward this confrontation since June. He looked at the room. So have we. We stopped treating it like something to avoid and treat it like something to complete. Where is he? Lupin asked. Little Hangleton, Harry said. The Riddle House. He's been there since the ritual. He knows it, it carries his family history, and he'll have set defenses that align with the dark magic he's strongest in. He looked at Dumbledore. You and I are going in together. Sirius has the perimeter, he knows the terrain and he's better at anticipating the guard patterns than anyone else. Lupin coordinates the Order's response to whatever Voldemort has positioned outside the house. The Order isn't assembled, Dumbledore said. Then assemble them, Harry said. We have tonight. He won't move before morning, he's been building power through the ritual and full consolidation takes 12 hours. This is what we have. Dumbledore looked at him for the last time in the way he'd initially looked at Harry, the way that was still searching for the child, still carrying the weight of the plan he'd had. Then that look finished, and what replaced it was something cleaner. A man looking at the reality in front of him. All right, Dumbledore said. The Riddle House was dark when they came to it. The village of Little Hangleton was sleeping and the hill above it was cold and the house on the hill had the quality of a place that had been bad for a long time and had recently become worse. Harry felt Voldemort from the bottom of the hill. It was the complete version of the thing he'd felt in fragments for 3 years, the full presence of it, restored and dark and furious with a fury that had the quality of someone who has been reduced and then reconstituted and is determined to make the reduction mean something. The force around him was genuinely extraordinary in the way that power which has been built through terrible means was still power, and Harry felt it without flinching, without giving ground inside himself, feeling it fully and letting it simply be what it was, a version of the force that had been pointed in the wrong direction for 40 years. He walked up the hill. Dumbledore was beside him. Sirius was gone to the perimeter. The Order was moving into position around the village below. The night was cold and clear, and the force sang through everything with perfect fidelity. The wards on the house dissolved as they approached, not because Harry broke them, he let Dumbledore handle that, because Dumbledore's specific expertise in ward work was one of the things Harry genuinely could not replicate and he knew the value of what you couldn't replicate, and they went through the front door like the arrival of something that had been scheduled. Voldemort was in the main room. He looked, not monstrous. This was the thing that Harry noticed immediately. He looked like a man. A very pale, very cold man with red eyes that had the quality of someone who had looked at the universe and removed from it everything he found inconvenient, but still a man, still the thing that Tom Riddle had been building toward for 40 years, the terrifying accomplishment of it. 7 feet of restored power and cultivated darkness and the most brilliant dark mind in the wizarding world's recent history, and he looked at Harry across the room with those red eyes. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. Tom, Harry said. The temperature in the room shifted. Nobody calls me that, Voldemort said. I know, Harry said. That's why I do. Dumbledore moved to Harry's right and Voldemort's attention split, the calculation of a master tactician mapping the threat geometry instantly. Harry felt it happen and used the half-second of divided attention to read the room, felt Nagini in the corner, coiled, felt the Horcrux in her with its familiar wrongness, felt the shape of Voldemort's defenses arranged in the space around him. The Horcruxes, Voldemort said. He said it with a control that was almost perfect. Not quite. The force caught the hairline fracture in it, the specific crack that appeared when he referenced them. You've been busy. We have, Harry said. 6 months of busy. You're the last piece. You think I can be ended, Voldemort said. After everything I've built. Everything I've survived. You've survived being reduced, Harry said. That's different from being whole. Every Horcrux you made took something from what you were. He looked at Voldemort with the steady green eyes that hadn't looked away from anything for 3 years. By the time you made the 7th, Tom Riddle was essentially gone. What's left is, he paused. Chose the word precisely. Architecture. The shape of a person without the substance. Something moved in the red eyes. You're trying to make me angry, Voldemort said. I'm telling you the truth, Harry said. Because you've never had anyone tell you the truth without wanting something from you. I'm not trying to make you angry. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm telling you what I see when I look at you. He took a step forward. You were a brilliant person, Tom. You could have been extraordinary in ways that didn't cost everyone around you everything. That's the tragedy of it. Don't, Voldemort said, and the word came out with an edge that was sharper than any of the cold control that preceded it. Don't call it a tragedy. Don't pretend to mourn me, Voldemort said. You're here to destroy me. Yes, Harry said simply. Because you won't stop. Because every person you've made into a weapon and every life you've ended to keep yourself alive has a cost, and the cost is still accumulating, and it stops today. He raised his wand. His left hand was open. But that doesn't mean it isn't also a waste. Voldemort moved. The curse that came from his wand was green and it was the killing curse and it was perfectly thrown, the exact speed and angle of someone who had thrown it 10,000 times, and Harry moved sideways with the force carrying him clear of the path before his conscious mind had finished registering the motion, and the wall behind him went dark where the curse hit and he was already moving forward. The duel was not what the wizarding world would later struggle to describe, because the wizarding world's vocabulary for dueling was built around specific curse exchanges, the grammar of block and counter and attack in the formal tradition. This was not that. Harry moved through the space the way the Force moved through the space, which was fully and without reservation, and the magic came through his wand with the Force lending it a precision and reach that formal training alone didn't produce, and Voldemort was brilliant and experienced and entirely unprepared for the specific combination. Every time Voldemort set a defense, Harry felt its structure through the Force and found the gap in it before it fully materialized. Every curse that came at him was visible a half-second before it arrived in the shimmer of the Force's awareness, and half a second was enough. He didn't block everything, he redirected, the way Obi-Wan had taught him to redirect on that first night with Dudley's shove, the principle scaling perfectly from a childhood bully to the darkest wizard in a century. Dumbledore worked the flanks with the brilliance of 60 years of practical magic, forcing Voldemort's attention to split, and Voldemort split it with extraordinary skill, which told Harry something important: the man at his best was genuinely remarkable. It wasn't enough. Harry felt the moment, felt the Force point at it with perfect clarity, and he moved toward Voldemort rather than away, which was not what Voldemort expected, and he closed the distance in 3 steps and his left hand came up with the Force light already building and he put his hand flat against Voldemort's chest. The light came. Not the white gold of the fragments. This was different. This was the full expression of it, Force and magic in complete unification, pulled from the deepest channel Harry had, the place where everything he'd been given and everything he'd built over 13 years lived, and it came out as something the room had to adjust to. The light so fundamental it wasn't quite light as a physical phenomenon but something the Force expressed through the visible world because the visible world was the only frame available. Voldemort went rigid. The last Horcrux, Nagini, Harry felt it rupture, the soul fragment inside her dispersing outward as the light reached through Voldemort and through the connection, and Nagini made a sound that wasn't a snake sound and went still. The soul in Voldemort, the piece that was left, the diminished, calcified, hollow thing that had been Tom Riddle and had spent 40 years becoming less, Harry felt it the way he'd felt the others, felt the human thing beneath the darkness, the boy in the orphanage who had been frightened and brilliant and unloved, and he said to it, quietly, in a way that only the Force could carry, "You can stop." A silence inside a silence. Let go. The light in the room was very steady. Voldemort fell. Not dramatically. Not with thunder. He went to his knees and then forward, and the shell of what he'd built collapsed inward without the soul to hold it, and the red eyes went to dark, and the Dark Lord who had been the terror of the wizarding world for 40 years died on the floor of the house where his father had lived and where Tom Riddle had first understood what he was. The room went quiet. Dumbledore stood against the far wall and looked at the floor and then at Harry, and his face had the quality of someone who had arrived at the end of a very long thing and was not certain yet what came next. Harry stood in the silence and breathed. "Obi-Wan," he said, quietly. "Here," Obi-Wan said, warm and immediate and completely present. "Yoda," Harry said. "Here," Yoda said. Harry looked at the floor and felt the force move through the room, the slow return of warmth to a space that had been cold, the quality of a place where something heavy had been set down. "Was that right?" he said. Not in the way he'd asked after the first chamber. That had been a genuine question. This was something else, the checking in of someone who has done something irreversible and wants the people they trust to have witnessed it clearly. "Right, it was," Yoda said. "Everything you are, you brought to it. No more than that, no less." "He didn't suffer," Harry said. "At the end." "No," Obi-Wan said. "He didn't." "Good," Harry said. "He meant it completely." Dumbledore came forward and stood beside him and together they looked at what had been Voldemort, and after a moment Dumbledore said, very quietly, "I have been wrong about many things in my long life. I was wrong about how to protect you. I was wrong about how much to tell you. I was wrong about who you needed to be in this." He stopped. "Tried again. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Harry said. "You gave me Hogwarts. You kept the stone safe until I could deal with it. You trusted me eventually, and the eventually was understandable." He looked at the old man beside him. "We did this together. That's what I wanted." Outside, the Order was moving through Little Hangleton, doing what needed to be done, and dawn was starting somewhere east of the village, and the Force moved through everything with its single constant note. Sirius came through the door 5 minutes later, saw Harry standing in the middle of the room, and said, "Done." "Done," Harry said. Sirius Black stood in the doorway and looked at the room and then at Harry, at James Potter's hair and Lily Potter's eyes and a face that was becoming, unmistakably, entirely its own thing, and he crossed the room in 3 steps and put his arms around him, which was the most physical expression of emotion Harry had received from another person in his entire life, and Harry stood in it and let the Force tell him what it was, which was family. "Come home," Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. He pulled back and looked up at his godfather. "But first I need to find Ron and Hermione. They're going to be furious they missed it." Sirius laughed, the real laugh, the one that wasn't mad, the one that Azkaban had almost but not quite destroyed. "Your father would have done exactly the same thing," he said. "I know," Harry said, and he was genuinely pleased about this. He stood outside the Riddle house as the sun came fully over the hill and the Order moved around him and the world recalibrated to a shape it hadn't held in 40 years and he felt, in the Force, 2 presences settle beside him. Obi-Wan on his left. Yoda on his right. "What now?" Harry said. "Whatever you choose," Obi-Wan said. "There will be more years at Hogwarts," Harry said. "There are things I still want to learn. Things I want Ron and Hermione to have. And Ginny. And Neville." He looked at the morning. "There are other dark things. Not Voldemort, but the world doesn't stop having problems because this one is solved." "No," Obi-Wan agreed. "It doesn't." "Then I'll keep going," Harry said simply. "That's the only plan that makes sense to me." "Know what I think?" Yoda said. "Tell me," Harry said. "Met many beings in 900 years, I have," Yoda said. "Young and old. Strong and weak. Wise and foolish." He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone selecting with precision. The Force, it chooses carefully. In you, everything it hoped for, I see. Force and magic, yes. Power, yes. But more than that. He paused. A person who carries power without losing themselves. Rare, that is. Rarer than power itself. Harry stood in the morning light and felt that settle into him. I had good teachers, he said. Yes, Yoda said, and his tone had in it everything that 900 years of living and however many years of being something beyond life had given him. So did I, once. Differently, we grew. But the same principle, a good teacher does not make you what they are. Makes you more fully what you already were. Obi-Wan said nothing for a while. Then, Anakin told me once, near the end of the Clone Wars, that he thought the Force had given him to me instead of the other way around. That I learned more from teaching him than I gave. Harry looked at him. I think that again now, Obi-Wan said. With different grief and much more gladness. The morning was bright and cold and the world was already beginning to process the fact that it was different now, that something that had been a weight over it for 40 years had lifted, and the wizarding world would scramble and politic and argue over what came next in all the ways that people scramble and politic and argue when the emergency ends and the ordinary reasserts itself. Harry Potter stood at the top of the hill and felt the Force move through everything, through the cold grass and the village below and the distant castle over the mountains and the people in it, Ron and Hermione who would receive his Patronus message and come at a run, Neville who had been growing into himself with the steady sureness of a plant in good soil, Ginny who had survived something that would have destroyed many people and had come through with her warmth intact, Lupin who had found his pack again, Sirius who was learning to live in a world that had kept going without him. He felt it through all of them. One note, under everything. Present in the light and the dark, in the ordinary and the enormous, in the 13-year-old boy standing on a hill in Yorkshire in the early morning light with a wand in his pocket and a sword that had been returned to a hat that was currently on a shelf in a headmaster's office and 2 dead teachers who were more alive than most living people he'd met. He turned away from the house and started down the hill. Behind him, Obi-Wan and Yoda moved with him, which was their nature, which had been their nature for 8 years, which would continue to be their nature for as long as the Force connected all things, and Harry Potter walked through the world the way he walked through it, with open eyes and an open hand and the absolute, settled, unassailable certainty of someone who had never once, not since the age of 5 in a cupboard in Surrey, believed that the universe owed him darkness. He walked, and the Force walked with him, and the morning got brighter, and below him Sirius was laughing at something Lupin had said, and somewhere north of him Hermione was already out of bed and running, and somewhere just behind him 2 of the finest teachers any universe had ever produced were watching him descend the hill and feeling, in their luminous country between all things, something that was past pride and past love and into a territory that didn't have a common name but that the Force recognized perfectly. The morning opened. Harry walked into it.